Good morning, everyone. The clock says it's 9:15, and we'll use that clock as our official clock. Today is September 28th, 2023. For those of you who may be viewing this at a later time or reading a transcript, we're in the St. Croix County Government Center in Hudson, Wisconsin, the county seat of St. Croix County, and this is the Zoning Board of Adjustment. Apparently this date and time was published twice as required by law on September 14th and September 21st. If anybody has a reason to think that that publication was defective or didn't happen, please speak up at this time. Otherwise, we'll deem it to have been done and overseen by Julie quite properly. Hearing nothing, I take it that's all right. I therefore call the meeting to order. My name is Buck Malick, and I am a citizen representative residing in the town of Hudson in St. Croix County. I'll ask the other board members to introduce themselves one by one and where they're from, and then ask the staff members who may speak subsequently to introduce themselves also on the record. Thank you. Mr. Peterson?
Dave Peterson, citizen member, town of Kinnickinnick.
Greg Telejohn, County Board Supervisor, District 14, represents Aaron Prairie, a little bit of Warren Township and Richmond Township.
David Nickham, citizen member, town of Baldwin.
Heather Amos, Corporation Counsel.
Jason Cheezit, Community Development Director.
Mike Wozniak, Land Use Administrator.
Jared Weiner, Land Use Planner.
Thank you all. Julie Peterson is taking notes and keeping the equipment running. We have a set of minutes, board members, to approve. If there is some edit or correction that any of you have in mind, please bring it up at this time. Otherwise, they will be deemed to be approved as they were printed up for us. Anything? There's nothing there. Deemed approved. We have just one matter today on the agenda, and it's a complex matter in the town of Somerset in St. Croix County, and it's in the Riverway zone. Mr. Weiner will be giving the presentation of the staff point of view on it. I'm not sure that everybody in the room has seen our procedure before, but it is essentially in this way. The staff presentation will be made. It's the same that was made available at the county's website for people to preview. He will give that presentation. The board may have some dialogue of questions with Mr. Weiner. Following that, we'll ask for anybody in the audience who wishes to speak in favor of the application to step up to the microphone. We do ask that before anybody approaches the microphone, they sign in on our sign-in sheet by the entry door there. When you do that, you take an oath to represent the facts truthfully in your subsequent testimony. So after hearing from those who are in favor of the application, perhaps with minor adjustments or perhaps major adjustments, who knows, then we'll ask for those who are opposed to the application, and lastly for those who don't want to take a position necessarily in favor or against, but have something to say that they think will assist the board in making the best possible decision. After that lengthy business, which to those of you who have to hear it every month is, I'm sure, a trial, nevertheless, here we go. Mr. Weiner, the floor is yours.
All right. So this is we looked at this last month, so I'm going to go through this again, but hopefully a little quicker than last month, just to give a refresher.
Don't feel that you need to rush.
I'm not rushing.
There's a hidden audience
right.
that's not here in the room.
I understand.
And for them, it's also important.
All right, so we've had an application from David and Kim Ward to expand a non-conforming principal structure at 301 221st Avenue in the town of Somerset, which is on the Riverway, in the conservation management zone, and is also subject to a and it's
Easement?
subject to scenic easement. I'm just not sure this is the right one. Either way, okay. So yeah, it is subject to a scenic easement, and it's in the conservation management zone. So the regulations here are slightly more strict than in the other zone that we manage. Okay, so I did make a correction to this slide from the last one, so I just wanted to point that out. The wards did file an exempt CSM to combine two of their lots, and they did change the ownership of that lot over to themselves. The other two parcels are in a trust that is under the ward, so they are under two different ownership groups.
I'm going to interrupt you, Mr. Weiner. I don't think it matters for this case, but I don't want to be perceived as conceding that ownership in their own names and ownership in a trust is necessarily two different owners. I would need to know more information.
Well, if you were to if you had property for yourself, say, that was under Buck Malik, and you had property under Malik Trust, and you wanted to combine those two, the Register of Deeds would not let you combine those two.
And that is certainly one factor to be considered in whether they are separate owners. It's, as I say, I don't think it matters for this case, but to the extent that anybody looks at this case in the future as a possible precedent for a different set of properties, I did not want it to be thought that I was agreeing that that is automatically the case.
Our code says otherwise.
You don't need to argue with me. I'm making a point for the record only. Thank you.
So this slide is slightly out of date because it does their property now includes the parcel, which is approximately 1 acre in size, to the west. It's this triangular piece. It's a little difficult to see on this slide, but that is now included in this parcel. So it is making it a legal conforming lot to Riverway standards, as well as the R2 standards, which they had both met before. So we have a 2,557 square foot principal structure on the property that includes 1,666 square feet for the habitable space, 576 square feet for the attached garage, and 315 feet of the deck that is covered by a roof, which by definition is included into the principal structure. We have two detached accessory structures on the property as well, a garage on the west side and a shed in the slope preservation zone along the stairway going down to the waters. It also has a wraparound deck, which is an accessory structure as well, concrete driveway, and stairs down to the pier. Per the line of sight survey, this is a conspicuous property or conspicuous structure. It is visible from the waterway, and that's what this slide here is showing. The layout of the existing building, the dwelling, which I just went over. So it's 1,666 for the principal, for the habitable space, 315 for the covered deck portion here, and then 576 for the garage. Oops. So we have several nonconformities that are occurring, which is why we're here before you today. The principal structure is located partially in the slope preservation zone. It is located within the 75-foot setback of the ordinary high, and it is located within the 25 side yard setback for the Riverway district. The deck is also located in the slope preservation zone and within 75 of the ordinary high watermark. The two detached garage sheds accessory structures are located within the 25-foot setback. And the smaller shed is also located in the slope preservation zone.
With the addition of that triangle of property, are the lot width and the setback from the side for the
That's a good catch.
garage now cured?
Yep, yeah, so that does alleviate that. That's a good point.
Is that detached garage appeared to me when I drove by the property recently to be a three-car garage, essentially. Is that the way you see it?
Yeah, it is sized. It is sized for a three-car garage. Yes. So we have a stairway that was reconstructed. We'll be addressing that later. And then there was an issue with some vegetation that was removed. That has also been resolved as well. So these next couple of slides just kind of go over why we're here and why the structure is a non-conforming structure. So the items that are in red are those items that it does not meet and require a variance. So as I stated before, the structure is located partially or wholly within a slope preservation zone. The structure is visually conspicuous. And the, let's see. And this here, because the structure is located in the slope preservation zone, that it does not meet this criteria either. So essentially, and that it exceeds 1,500 square feet. So whenever a structure is located within the slope, the ordinary high water mark, which is in this case 200 feet rather than the 75 feet in standard shoreland, structures are not allowed to exceed 1,500 square feet. All right. So this is kind of going over what they initially proposed. So we have a complex timeline here. So there is some things that the applicant has wished that were to not be on the table per se, but they are still included in the report because we are still in the initial public hearing, which we never closed. So option A is what they originally proposed. The areas that are in blue are the areas that would be demolished and reconstructed within the area of the footprint that's outlined here in red. This slide I did update because some of the numbers were inaccurate. So the net area actually did go down a little bit to 1,169 square feet, which is a 45.7% increase in square footage of the footprint. This is option B. This option, they at this point wish that it was not considered, or to not be considered. However, this option here would have been an increase in 10.4% of impervious surface on the site. This would have been a 266 square foot addition to the overall principal structure. Here's the floor plan for option A. So this goes into more detail. 809 square feet would be added to the dwelling, and 1,251 square foot attached garage would be added. So that would make it 3,726 square feet. This is just showing the layout of the basement and how they would be moving one bedroom from the upper level, or the main level, down to the basement with a net zero gain of bedrooms. Option B, again, this is a smaller footprint showing the garage not increasing in size, but just simply adding and enclosing the covered porch area and adding on to that as well. Again, this is just showing what's happening in the basement, and that it would be a net zero gain for bedrooms. This slide here is just to show you what the area that's being added to the roof line. So this would be occurring front and back on the structure. Here we have option A overlaid to the initial option B. Option B is shown in red, the option A is in black. This slide is out of date. I was not able to update it given the numbers. I don't have all the numbers to update this one, so I kind of left this. So this is not entirely accurate anymore. But with the addition of the property to the west, with option A and option B, they would be both under the 15% impervious surface threshold. And so they would only need to take care of the stormwater that they would be adding to the site. Here we have the elevations proposed for option A and a rendering for option A. Proposed elevations for option B. So if the variance would be, if the variance is approved, the applicant has already submitted a conditional use permit for filling and grading within 40 feet. That is also being considered today later on. And then also the deck is under consideration today as well. So those two would be met. The town of Somerset, they have seen this twice now, or two variations of this. In both times they forwarded minutes on that indicated that they were in favor of approval. Shoot. Julie, did we include the letter for the DNR? I don't remember if we did. Last meeting, we had a letter from the DNR indicated that they were not in favor of approval of a variance for this property. We have a letter here from the National Park Service indicating that the areas in which they want to expand the dwelling would satisfy the requirements that under the scenic easement that was purchased back in 1979. So just an update on the summary. So they have an updated version, which I have an addendum in here that they submitted. I'll go over that. I'll go over this thing when I go over that. So again, your actions today would be to approve with or without conditions, deny the request, or postpone the decision to absorb any information gathered today. And this is just our standard slide that we indicate to you for finding of facts that we need to answer here at the public hearing to justify any decisions. So we did initially give you a a recommendation from staff for the findings of fact and conclusion of law. With the updated materials, we reserved our documentation for you because we needed you guys to come up with that. Essentially, whatever decision you guys make, you guys need to come up with that today. So we just have some standard facts. So we have that David and Kim Warren are the owners. The property is located at 301 221st Avenue in the town of Somerset. The parcel is larger, that they did add and submit a CSM to combine the two lots. The property, the dwelling is a, actually I'm just going to go to that addendum right away. All right. So this is the addendum to the initial staff report. So a lot has happened. I am skipping to 61 of the packet. Sorry about that. All right.
Mr. Chair, if I might jump in. So what Jared's going to start going through now is the addendum, because there's been some changes in the applicant's request from our original hearing. And so we wanted to go through what was presented at the last public hearing, just so that all the members of the Board of Adjustment knew, in case there's talk about the original option B. And now the applicants have proposed a new option B, or like an option C. So I just want to be clear that that's why we went back through that other stuff, is just to bring everybody up to speed.
All right, so just an explanation of events that have occurred between the opening of this public hearing and today. So the applicant had submitted applications for a variance to reconstruct the deck. They required filling and grading within 40 feet of the top of the bluff, and then the after the fact conditional use for the reconstruction of the stairway leading down to the pier. The director opted to take those applications and waive the longer period since Somerset has already seen this and they were on board, so that we could hear that all today in one hearing and try to resolve this matter with a little more timely fashion. On the 7th, we sent out the public hearing notice to be published on the 14th and the 21st. And then on the 12th, September 12th, staff was informed that the applicant, by the applicant's agent, that option B was no longer an option and should not be considered. On the 13th, we received an exempt certified survey map to combine the two lots, which we just talked about a little earlier. So that way they stayed under the 15% impervious surface threshold in the shoreline requirements. On the 15th, we met, staff and corporation council met by teams at the applicant's request, or the agent's request, to further discuss the application. On September 18th, we were informed that there is a new modified version of option B, and that was forthcoming, which came on the 19th with an updated narrative. And on the September 21st, we completed the review of the materials and summarized this in this report.
Did you have an opportunity to send it to the DNR, to Mike Wenholtz?
The option B, well, given the contents of his letter, he was not in favor of any variance approval on this property.
So you decided not to send it to
We
the
did not.
DNR?
So this is the certified survey map that was submitted to staff. It has since been recorded. So the lot is now 2.35 acres when you remove the right-of-way area and the area below the ordinary high water mark. It has 635 feet of shoreline, which meets the requirements of the easement. And the lot now exceeds the 250-foot lot minimum in the conservation area for the riverway. So this is a modified version of option B. So the dwelling, the habitable space is the same as what was in the originally submitted option B. However, we're looking at a larger garage. We're looking at essentially 33 by 34. And this corner here is cut out of the garage, so that way they don't encroach any further into the 25-foot setback, and also reducing the need to apply for a variance under the R2 zoning district. If they were to square this off, it would encroach into the 10-foot setback.
For those who might be reading a transcript, in the future, that would be the southeast corner of the garage, am I right?
No, that would be the northeast corner of the garage of the property. So everything that's been presented to you in the packet is, because of the orientation of the original lot, north is actually on your left when you're looking at the packet. Or somewhere thereabout.
Yeah, it's, I'm looking at packet page 62, and then when I look over to packet page 63, I have to turn it 90 degrees the other way.
Yeah.
That way.
So if, zoom in here.
So the reader of the transcript, it is advised to look for a map, and then it'll be clear.
So the CSM indicates that it's a 13.7 setback, 13.7 foot setback, currently from the garage to the property line, to the west property line. Or, I'm sorry, to the east property line. Okay, so here we have an overlay of the existing home over with the new option B. And so the garage, in this case, is being pushed further to the west, or added on to the west and to the north. And then it's showing the infill of the covered deck area, and then a small expansion on the west and east side, essentially connecting the roof lines from the garage to the dwelling. And that's indicated here in pink on the next page.
West faces the river, right?
Yes, sorry. Yes.
And so the garage is being pushed out to the east.
Now you've got me all mixed up.
I'm sorry about that. I'm trying to understand.
Yes, you're right.
myself.
So the house faces, the river is on the westerly side of the property.
And kind of the axis of the house drawn, continued on through the garage is an east-west line.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that may help.
All right, then we just have updated elevations, very similar to what we've seen before. This is just my note of what I updated on the initial staff report that I had just went through a few minutes ago on these slides that I updated with the, corrected information. And then here we just kind of run through some of the items for the filling and grading within the 40, as this matter is directly tied with the approval or denial of the variances. And so they are meeting all the requirements for filling and grading. The only thing here is that construction plans haven't been submitted yet. So I don't have exact specifications on what would be in place for stormwater management. We just have a drawing showing that they would meet those requirements.
And I take it that as the staff actually recommended the old option B, the staff is even more in favor of the new option B modified, huh?
We reserve our,
You're taking no position?
we reserve our position until after the hearing's closed.
Mr. Chair, I can add a little bit. In respect for the applicants and their agent, they may bring new information to the table. So as staff, we wanted to take and provide an update after we hear their information, because what happens in the public hearing may ultimately, change staff's opinion, or maybe they need to modify their opinion so that it's not a predetermined outcome. So that was the thought process.
I see. This is unusual. So I take it, board members, if you have questions for Mr. Weiner, you are welcome to try, but he's apparently not prepared to say much until he hears from the applicant. First time for me in 16 years, but we live with what's presented to us. Thank you, Jared. So applicants and applicants' spokespersons, it's your turn in the spotlight.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a couple of, maybe these surveys would help. The certified survey map was actually recorded, and it was received after all the materials had been submitted, so we do have that now. And it will help you orient, I think, a little bit yourself to the property and the structures on it, east, west, north, south. I find that helps me a little bit too. So, Dave, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, if you'll give those to the staff member who's closest to you, the staff member will make sure it becomes a part of the record, and we'll pass copies along to the board members as appropriate. I take it that you will explain these to us, so as you make your presentation.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I will. Thank you. My name is Corey Land. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Levander, Gillen & Miller, which is located in Eagan, Minnesota. I am a licensed attorney to practice in both Minnesota and Wisconsin, and as the chair knows, I live about 5 miles from here over in the town of Hudson, stone's throw from the town hall. So I'm a resident. I have been a resident for the last 20 years. We may not know each other, and I know it's always difficult to talk to strangers, but you've probably seen me at the grocery store. You've probably seen me at Fleet Farm. I am a frequent buyer of things at Fleet Farm. For some reason, it's one of my favorite places. So we know each other. We're neighbors. So I'm not a stranger to you.
If you're suggesting that we have a bias against Minnesotans, I reject that concept.
Vikings fans, I completely understand a bias against that. However,
There we go.
and I am a true Packer fan. Anyway, I'm sorry. I
Nope,
wanted
little
to
levity's
explain,
good.
Mr. Chair, also, and members of the commission, what I do for a living typically, although I represent various developers on the private side, most of my practice involves representing city government. I'm a city attorney for the cities of Stillwater, Cottage Grove, and Hastings, all located along a river. A very similar river, just different parts of it. So I'm very comfortable in this environment, dealing with boards of adjustments, planning commissions, even city councils and county boards. This is kind of what I do in my regular job. So I'm pleased that we're in the public hearing process and we can present our side of the case because, as you know, due process is critical to your decision. And so you've heard the county side of the story, although they're not ready to make an opinion about it. I appreciate that you're opening the public hearing so that you can hear our side of the story, because that's what you'll base your decision on. I know this application looks really complicated and there's a lot of material in front of you and there's been a lot of plans presented. And I just want to apologize that it seems complicated, because really it's quite simple. We have a legal nonconforming structure and the wards would like to make it bigger. That's all it amounts to. It was legal at the time it was constructed, but all of these regulations went on top of it afterwards, and now they'd like to do something with it, but they need your permission to do that. That's what this application is about. We started working with staff in April, as I always recommend to my city government, the city staffs that I work with. Talk to your developers that are coming before you with a planning application and see if you can figure out a project that you can all agree on, wrap up in a pretty little bow, and present it to the board for their decision. But it's much easier and cleaner if you come with a package that everybody agrees to. So we started back in April meeting with staff. We went through several renditions as presented. This is not the only 2 or 3. There was a 4th option as well. But the wards have clearly indicated that that Plan B is not livable. It's not workable for them. They can't make it work for what they need. And that's why we're here. They need to make modifications to their home because Dave would like his mother to come live with him, with them, be their caregivers. They will be her caregiver. And they need to take care of her because she is a person with disabilities. So that's the ask. That's the reason that they even need the modifications to begin with. But to set the stage for you, I just want to explain where we are in the world. Not everybody probably made a site visit, so I want you to visualize it. Fortunately, most of my presentation is pictures and not words, so you'll be able to visualize exactly as we walk through the property. They live on the end of a dead-end road. It is a town road, but there are only 2 property owners on it, one private, one public. The wards own 90% of the property, and the U.S. government owns the other part of the property. So they are the only 2 residents, if you will, on this dead-end road. This is the end of the dead-end road. If you were to go straight, you would go straight into the river. If you go to the right, you go to the other property that the wards own, and if you go to the left, you will turn into their driveway. So let's turn to the left. This is what their property looks like, their house looks like from the road. It is set back quite a distance from the road. This is the accessory structure that is located that was last month non-conforming from the setback. It is now conforming. The lot width, as you indicated, this is the certified survey map that is recorded, that's in front of you now, that shows they've combined these 2 lots, so it is 1 lot. The other survey that's in front of you is just the overall survey of all of the structures on the property and where all of the lines, dotted lines are and things, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But I wanted to explain that since the last meeting, the wards have removed 2 of the nonconformities that are within their control. They were able to combine the lots and take away 2 of the nonconformities. These other nonconformities, they can't remove. So that's why they're here before you. I was going to talk about the variance for the deck replacement here, but staff hasn't presented their case yet, so I'll just quickly kind of go through. You can see why it needs to be replaced. It wraps all the way around the house. It's a wooden deck. It's definitely in need of some tender loving care. And so they would simply replace it in its exact same footprint, except for the back, which will be made smaller as it ties into the new structure of the home. So it won't expand. As you can see, right now it's a 360 around the house. It would no longer be that because it would tie into the back of the new enclosed part of the house. So as you continue around the house, then there's a deck, or there's a screened-in porch underneath the deck that clearly also needs to be replaced. It will not be expanded. It will simply be replaced with maintenance-free materials in its exact same footprint. That one feels a little less controversial. The other is the conditional use permit for the stairs. Again, I was thinking staff was going to present all of it as a project. But yes, it's a after-the-fact conditional use permit. But as you know, conditional use permits are generally permissible uses that you just need to take a look at to make sure they don't need any extra conditions. As you can see, this was constructed probably about 4 or 5 years ago. All of the vegetation anything that was removed has grown back, and in fact is kind of growing into the stairs now. But the material is very durable. This is just another couple shots of it. You can see it has worn very well over the last few years, and we do expect that it will last for many years to come. It's not super shiny or scary or obnoxious. It's just a metal stairway that was replacing an unsafe wooden stairway that was there before. So let's get to the crux of the matter, which is the interior modification to the home. Again, we didn't make a site visit, so I'm going to walk you through the house so you can see why they need to make these modifications. As you can see, there's 2 sets of stairs to get to the front door. Unfortunately, there are only external stairs to get to the front door. There's no way to get from the ground and up to the 5-foot elevation of the front door other than using one of these 2 stairs or this other one around the side towards the river. There are no internal stairs to get to the main door. So if you're in the garage and you park your car, you have to walk out of the garage, outside, up to one of these 2 stairways to get into the house. That's one of the things they want to change, is having an internal stairway in the garage to get up 5 feet. So that's one of the things that needs to be modified in order to accommodate somebody with a disability. They can't maneuver these stairs. They need to have an alternative. And the alternative that is reasonable is putting a wheelchair accessible lift in the garage with an internal stairway. Once you go up the stairways and into the front door, now you open the front door and you see here's the small entryway with this beautiful giant chimney that is so immovable. And you have to work around it if you're going to make any interior modifications to the house. You walk in the door and to the left is immediately the doorway into the master bedroom, which is small and narrow. not easy to maneuver with a walker or a wheelchair. You look at the chimney again, and you can't even walk all the way around it, so you don't have an option of going left or right around the chimney, because if you go left, you're going downstairs. The downstairs is where the laundry room is, and it's a narrow, steep stairway. There's no way Grandma Ward could maneuver this stairway to get to the lower level very easily. I can remember as a kid, houses that were built in the 70s, you had narrow, steep stairways. That was just normal. But it's not safe for somebody with a disability. If you're going to go around the chimney to the right, it's a really skinny hallway. And again, it's not easy or even possible to maneuver with a walker or a wheelchair. We're going to come out on the other side of the chimney now, and you can see what's behind the wall is a small bathroom and a very small spare bedroom. All of that will be demolished so that we can make room for a new entryway, wider hallways, more maneuverability within this side of the house. I'm just going to keep turning to the left, and there's the kitchen. And then we're going to turn a little bit farther to the left. There's the dining room. And now I'm going to turn back to the right of the chimney. Hopefully you're orienting yourselves with me. And we're now looking at the other side of the master bedroom. So we saw it from the entryway. Here's the doorway from the living room. This is the living room. That's it. That's the size of the living room. You can see where the roof beams terminate. That goes straight down to the wall. And behind me, I'm standing with my back against the glass doors that lead out to the deck. So that's the extent of the home. That's the living space that we're talking about. It is not a big, gigantic home. All of the part that will be demolished starts at this interior wall to the master bedroom. All the way, I'm going to go back to this wall in the kitchen. All of that will be demolished internally and redone so that they can make it ADA accessible for Grandma Ward. They're going to have to put in, obviously, wider doors, wider hallways, but a much more accessible bedroom and master bathroom. Because right now, there's some serious issues, as you know, with bathrooms that you can't even turn around in it. There's no way that she could turn around in it with a wheelchair or a walker. And then this is how you have to get into the shower. If you have anybody with mobility issues, you always have to hold their arm as they go over even a threshold for a door, much less trying to maneuver into a shower. So there's a lot of internal remodeling that has to take place. In addition, they would like to move the laundry room up to the main level. And that's what the extra space is for under the walkway right now, is to move the laundry room upstairs to give them that extra room. Unfortunately, what's going to happen without the Plan A model, which extended further into the backyard than this new model, they're going to have to move this wall further into the living room. And in fact, Kim explained that when she measured it out, she can't even fit a full-length couch in the new living room. So it's going to be a really tiny living space in order to keep it within this smaller footprint. Would they still prefer option A? Absolutely. Absolutely. And since it was presented, I would argue it's still on the table. But they have presented a plan that's workable, but it's not favorable for them. So ideally, they would get the option A living space with this garage space that they have presented in this new version of the plan. So we have the exterior modifications now to go through. Just to orient yourself onto the property, and you can kind of see from the survey how the house is a little bit crooked on the property, so it doesn't sit square facing north. That fence off to the left, which would be towards the east, is deceiving because it is not the property line. The chain link fence is not on the property line. It's actually enclosing the backyard for the dog. You can see the doghouse there. And I'll show you, in fact, I believe it's on the other survey map that I provided. It shows you where that chain link fence is so that you can see it is not directly on the property line. It is simply enclosing the backyard. Off to the right of this photo is the river. So that would be westward. West is the river. And you can even see the top of the stairway that lead down to the river from there. So the National Park Service owns all of the property to the east, and the river is all of the property to the west. Moving up closer to the house, this is what it looks like today up close. Again, that chain link fence enclosing just enclosing the backyard, not on the property line. But this is the way it looks today, and I want to show you the comparison for the rendering so you can see what it would look like tomorrow. So this is the change. It's simply enclosing that, I'll call it an outdated covered walkway, which in wintertime is not ideal. It's enclosing that, making it living space, and then expanding the garage slightly to the east and slightly to the north. So this is what it would look like as a finished product. The part that faces the river doesn't change at all. This is the map that you have, that second certified survey map that shows how close that the fence line, the property line that runs vertically north and south is to that corner of the existing garage. It currently encroaches into the 25-foot setback, and if we're going to demolish and replace, that's why we have to come to you for that variance. But we will not come closer than the existing corner of that garage. So that's why we had to lop off the corner, to make sure that it does not encroach any further than the existing 13.7 feet. And this map actually shows right here is kind of where the expanded garage would be. So it'll be at an angle, and you can see there's still quite a bit of distance from the property line. So even though it will be a little bit larger towards that east property line, it's still going to be a good distance from the National Park Service property. So this is the part that's going to be demolished. The covered walkway and the garage. And the sole purpose is to provide for ADA accessible accommodations for Grandma Ward. So the garage will now have an internal stairway and a wheelchair accessible lift, which if you tried to put it in this existing garage would automatically eat up a full space. And then you'd be down to a one-stall garage. So they are simply asking to expand it slightly to the east to allow them to maintain what they have today, which is a two-stall garage, and yet move an internal stairway and add a wheelchair accessible lift. So this is the new layout of the house. As you can see, now the stairway comes up onto a landing and with the wraparound deck, which terminates at the back of the house. So it is slightly smaller. You walk into the entryway, the hallways are much bigger, much easier to maneuver. You walk around all the way around to the master bedroom, and it is a little bit smaller master bedroom, but it's a much larger master bathroom, which is, again, key. It also provides access to that laundry room from both sides. If you're a person with a disability and you're moving around in a wheelchair, the last thing you want to do is back up. You want to keep moving forward. This floor plan allows for complete circulation and the ability for somebody with a disability to keep moving forward. It moves the laundry room upstairs, as I said, which in a pinch could double if a caregiver needed to put a rollaway bed in it. They could, because there are times you need to be on the same level as the person with a disability. Happens all the time. I remember when my kids were little, you wanted to be right there in case you didn't hear them from the bedroom down the hall. So you needed to be close. Last thing you want is to be downstairs. If there's an issue or if there's a problem, you want to be close. As I said, the living room will not accommodate a full-size couch, so they'll have to do something to allow for that. The Plan A option would have allowed for a regular-sized living room. So again, just planting the seed that still is in play. Other than the wards will have conceded that this garage corner could be cut off here, and this garage is fine. So if we could somehow have the Plan A living space with this garage, I would call that a win. The garage, as you can see, has the stairway internally leading up to the landing and the wheelchair lift at the back. You can't tell Grandma Ward, here, I'm putting you on the wheelchair lift, hang on, I got to run outside so I can go up the stairway and I'll meet you at the landing. You need to be able to get right there. The internal stairs is not unreasonable, but then it eats up a full space. So this, as was pointed out, this is the new footprint. The pink is the new addition to the footprint of the house. It's not egregious, it's not outrageous. It's all on the landward side, closest to the National Park Service property. So the existing house is 2557 square feet. The new house will be 3297 square feet. So the difference is only 740 square feet. It really is not a significant increase in the size of the home. So you need to apply your test, the variance test by state law. This is in Wisconsin statute 596947C. The three-pronged test is if you're going to approve the variance, it can't be contrary to the public interest. Literal enforcement of your ordinances will result in unnecessary hardship. And if you're going to grant the variance, the spirit and intent of the ordinance will be observed. That's the three-pronged test. I feel like two of them are fairly easily met, will not be contrary to the public interest. You look at the neighborhood, will it violate anybody else's rights in the neighborhood? The wards are the neighborhood. They're the only other private property owner on this dead-end road. The other property owner is the U.S. government. They're a very quiet neighbor. They're hardly ever home. They're never going to develop their property. So it's not bothering the public interest. And as Jared pointed out, the impervious surface increase is minimal, and they're willing to do stormwater treatment for any increase or any improvements that they're making. So we're resolving that issue as well. The spirit and intent of the ordinance is to preserve and maintain property values. That's exactly what this variance does. It preserves and maintains their existing home with a two-stall garage, which it enjoys today. It preserves and protects the bluff because it's not being done on the landward side at all. None of these improvements are being done on the landward side. On the riverward side, sorry, thank you. On the riverward side, all of it is on the landward side closest to the National Park Service property. So they're not encroaching into the bluff, the ordinary high water mark than they already are. All of these improvements are towards the internal part of the lot on the east side next to the National Park Service property. And most importantly, this improvement will not be visible from the river at all. Because of the existing vegetation, because of its location, all of it being on the landward side, it will not be visible. So then we go to the unnecessary hardship test. And the unnecessary hardship test says that literal enforcement will be unnecessarily burdensome on the landowners, meaning if you have to apply all of your ordinances, it will have too much of a burden on the landowners to use their property. And, as you know, it must be unique to the property, not self-created. Looking at the unnecessarily burdensome, you look at all the other alternatives. Don't they have all their alternatives to do something with their property if you try to adhere to the ordinances? They could ask the National Park Service for an exception. That feels unnecessarily burdensome because the National Park Service has a vested right in their scenic easement, which they paid for. So to go to them to ask for an exception to say, do you mind if we build a ramp in the front yard to accommodate our disabled grandma so that she can get up into the main door of the house, first of all, doesn't solve all the problems, and second of all, feels intrusive into the scenic easement that the National Park Service paid for. Secondly, to require the owners or ask the owners to build an entirely new house on a different piece of property just because they own it feels really burdensome when they can just add a 740 square foot addition to accomplish the same purpose. The county has a reasonable accommodation ordinance. I wasn't sure how familiar you were with it because, I mean, you know, staff refers to it and you just kind of gloss over it. Oh yeah, we have one of those. Apply for it and you're good. I read it. I included it in the materials because I think you need to read it too. It allows for you to do three things if you have a disability. You can apply for a ramp, a walkway, or a deck. That's it. That's your reasonable accommodation. That doesn't solve every person's disability. I think you need to take another look at that ordinance and either repeal it or revise it. Because if I'm a person with a disability and I look at those three options and that doesn't satisfy my disability, this isn't a reasonable alternative to even consider applying for. I heard mention to the exterior accessory garage. It's really a storage building, and I could go back to a picture to show you the condition it's in is not usable. So you can see it from far away, and it's a two-stall. It has 2 garage doors on it, but it's not used for a garage. It hasn't been used, as you can see, for a garage for years. It is used for storage at the moment, and if you were to say, well, just use your other garage, it would not be usable in its present condition. It would have to be demolished and rebuilt in its current footprint, which then, guess what? They're back before you for a variance because it's within all of the protected zones again. So all they're going to do is be in a vicious cycle of coming back before this board to reconstruct an existing accessory structure, which is a storage building, instead of using an addition onto their existing house to serve the same purpose.
Let me interrupt you there. Are you testifying as a fact that that is not usable for the storage of one vehicle?
I am testifying to the fact that if they wanted to store their existing vehicles in this garage, it would not be in a condition that they would feel that it is safe to do so.
I understand how you don't want to answer exactly my question, but are you stating as a matter of fact that not one vehicle could be put in that building?
I am testifying to the fact that they would not want to put their vehicles in this building.
I can understand what they don't want.
And they have informed me that they would need to demolish it and reconstruct it in order to make it usable.
Uh-huh. Have they consulted a carpenter or an architect or someone who actually knows about these things?
And Mr. Chair, with all due respect, I think it is outside the scope of this application that they would have needed to do so, because it is not one of the things that they were looking at in their addition to their home.
I appreciate your point, but you're the one who said that it was unusable.
And it is unusable according to their, if you'd like to ask them their testimony, that's fine. But getting back to the unnecessary hardship and the inability to, that everything is unnecessarily burdensome, there are no reasonable alternatives. There is a spot on their property that they can build something, and it's right here at the red X. It is outside of all of the zones. It's outside the 50-foot front yard setback, the 25-foot side yard setback, the 200 ordinary high water mark, and the 40-foot bluff line. It's outside all of them. It's a tiny little triangle, and it would serve no purpose. It probably would even be, because it's within the scenic easement, it would be visible from the river. So it would violate that. But this is the only buildable space on their property. What I'm saying is they have no alternatives. They've looked at all of them, and they don't have any. So then the other part of the test of being meeting the unnecessary hardship test is that the circumstances must be unique to the property, not self-created. That was explained in the memo that we provided in your packet. The DNR is wrong in saying that structures cannot be legal, that legal nonconforming structures cannot be considered to be unique to the property, because that is not what the Wisconsin Supreme Court has held. Granted, it was written by a non-lawyer. Had he submitted it to the legal counsel of the state, they probably would have corrected him on that statement. But that is not a legal conclusion and an accurate one to say that you can't consider legal nonconforming structures, because they can be considered under the Wisconsin Supreme Court. So you can check that box, and we don't have to belabor the point. All of the documentation, case law, has been submitted in your materials. I want to touch on this one area because it keeps getting brought up that the property or the structure is visually conspicuous. And it is a condition in your ordinance that any structures are supposed to be visually inconspicuous. That's true. But you don't have a definition. And so it's subjective. And there was an application in the June packet that was remarkably similar. And for those of you that attended the June meeting, you may recall it was a hexagon-shaped house on the bluff. Ours isn't, theirs is a octagon. I think this is a hexagon. But regardless, both structures unique on the bluff, asking for an addition to their legal nonconforming structure. That one was the rudder variance. So both applications are very, very similar. This is the view that was submitted from the Rudders application, the view that they could see from their deck looking at the river. In their application, staff said that their structure was visually inconspicuous. This is the view from the Ward stack looking at the inlet, which looks out at the main channel of the river, and their house is deemed visually conspicuous. I looked up the definition of visually conspicuous in Webster's, just to give a frame of reference, since there isn't one in your ordinance. And conspicuous means easily seen, attracting attention, or striking. So it sticks out. It's noticeable. The surveyor took a picture of the Ward's house from the main channel of the river. This is what it looks like. This is what it looked like in May. I don't see this as easily seen, attracting attention, or striking. It's visible, but is it conspicuous? I guess that's your subjective determination. But even up close, this is what it looks like from their dock. Again, it's visible, but is it conspicuous? Even if you think it is, this application is not about the existing structure. It's about the addition to it. The project should focus on the addition. And the addition will not only be visually inconspicuous, it will be visually invisible to the river. It can't be seen. Just for a second, to remind you of what happened in the Rudder case, their expansion of their legal nonconforming structure was an ask of an additional 1,000 square feet to their structure. Now, they didn't have as much hair on their property as the Wards do. I agree. But they were still built within the 40-foot bluff setback. They're taller. They have a taller bluff. So they weren't within the ordinary high water mark. But their application was for a 1,000-foot addition to their home for office, storage space, useful living room, and a bedroom. That's what they wanted it for. Their variance was approved. The percentage increase to the size of their house in that variance was 130%. They were more than doubling their size. This application is 28.9% based on the modified plan that's in front of you. And it would be 38% if it was the original version. The Rudder application was approved unanimously. It's the same variance test. You're only looking at the same criteria. Is it contrary to the public interest? Will it cause unnecessary hardship on the owner? And is the spirit and intent of the ordinance observed if you grant the variance? It's the same test. It was met in the Rudder case. It's been met here. And even if you think it hasn't, even if for some reason you think that there's a criteria that they haven't met, meet Grandma Ward. The ADA federal law gives you all of the reason in the world to approve this variance, because federal law applies to the state of Wisconsin, it applies to St. Croix County's ordinances, it applies to this Board of Adjustments as you consider a variance application for a residential property and a person with a disability who is requested to live here with her caregivers. It's a reasonable accommodation. It's a reasonable request. Take away the ADA issues with it, it's just a reasonable expansion of a home on a landward side that won't be visible from the river. All of it is reasonable. I included the entire letter from the National Park Service when they approved, or they reviewed the original Plan A option, and they had no problems. It did not violate their scenic easement at all. But on the second page of that letter, which was not included in your packet or materials, except for the part that I submitted, they said this directly to the Wards: "Thank you for the very important role you play in helping to protect the St. Croix River from present and future generations." The National Park Service looked at this application and they said, "Thank you. You're doing exactly what we asked. You're preserving your property, not just for yourselves, but for future generations." They don't expect all houses to be demolished along the river. They fully expect there to be people living along the river, but do it responsibly. That's what the Wards are trying to do. The National Park Service said, "Thank you. You're doing it right." We would stand for any questions from the board.
I have to say, the wards are represented magnificently. You have a most eloquent spokesperson in Attorney Land, for which you should be duly grateful. I've been listening to presentations for some 16 years, and this is far and away the most eloquent. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean I'm going to agree with her. You understand that. I'm myself wondering if we don't have to look at the Rudder case now that's been brought up, and if we don't have to ask the staff to look at that garage now that that's been brought up. And I have other questions, but we'll see what you think. Mr. Wozniak, do you want to make a point?
I would just caution, each variance has to be considered on its own merits. You know, variances don't set precedent, so just bear that in mind. The circumstances may be similar, but the specifics of each property tend to be unique, at least to a degree. So bear that in mind.
Yep, there are often factors that aren't superficially apparent that cause one decision to be favorable and another not to be favorable, or this or that. But nevertheless, this has been thrown at us as an argument for why we must grant this variance request, and to ignore that argument, oh, sure, enables us to make a decision a month faster than if we put it over a month to look at that, but might be setting up for loss on appeal. Anyway, board members, you have questions? Mr. Nickum.
I say this very respectfully. The lady you're talking about, Mrs. Ward, that is handicapped, is a grandmother?
She's Dave's mother.
Okay. And I'm a grandpa, and I live with a grandmother. The question is that you use the argument that this, in her case, that this needs to be done because of her handicap, which I know all about when you get older. But suppose we were to go along with that line of approving this because of that, and she decides that she's not going to do that. She changes her mind. I just question the value of it. It just doesn't ring right as far as what will happen. I mean, the day after this is done, she could decide she's not going to move in. So we've made this decision on the basis that, not a guarantee, but that she is going to move in. Do you know what I'm saying?
I take it, Mr. Nickum, that you're drawing the distinction between a variance, which is permanent, and a reasonable accommodation, which is temporary for the duration of the disabled person living there. Yes, and that's, I guess, one of the issues that hasn't been discussed much yet here. We're being asked to grant a permanent variance so that the laundry room can be on the same floor as the disabled person, and as compared with all kinds of internal things they could do to the house, so long as they didn't change the outside walls, they wouldn't need our approval at all to do things inside. And if they could live with a ramp outside, they get that for the duration of the time that a disabled person lives there. Is that what you were trying to highlight for us here?
That is. And the discussion that we need to approve this because of that.
Mr. Chair, if I may offer a solution to that.
In a moment, you may. Did you finish your comment, Mr. Nickum? Yeah. Have we got that right, Mrs. Amos, that the accommodation part of our ordinance gives methods of relief that are temporary, as it were, for the duration of a disabled person's residence there, and that no permits are needed from this board to make internal changes to the house. It's the desire to have the laundry room on the same level that drives the request for an expansion of the walls of the house.
You are correct that St. Croix County Code of Ordinances, Chapter 17.36J3, does set forth the reasonable accommodations for disabled persons. And that section focuses on ramps, walkways, and decks, and the temporary nature of those items to be able to access the house or the structure. And that there can be an affidavit that's recorded with the Register of Deeds for the duration of that reasonable accommodation. And when the reasonable accommodation is no longer necessary, then that ramp, walkway, or deck could be removed. And the request from the applicants is to modify the home, the living area, which is an allowed request under the ADA and the FHAA. This board still needs to address whether the variance requirements are met to approve the request to the modifications of the principal structure. And if they don't meet the variance request, then you can address a reasonable accommodation. And there's standards that I indicated in my legal opinion that would need to be addressed. If you find that the variance standards have not been met, then what you would need to address for a reasonable accommodation.
Is the National Park Service exempt from the Americans with Disabilities Act? Can they say, well, our scenic easement prohibits putting a ramp? Or must they accommodate a disabled person?
They are a government entity, so I would presume that they would also need to comply with the ADA and the FHAA, which is why St. Croix County has to comply with it. We are a government entity. We have to address reasonable accommodations as a government entity. And they are a government entity also, so I believe they would have to follow the same federal law. I haven't researched that in its entirety, but that would be my thoughts off the top of my head.
Wanted to be heard?
I did, thank you. Two things. First of all, if they were to try to construct a ramp in the front yard, it would have to be 100 feet long, so keep that in mind. Outside.
I get 50 feet.
That was actually by our builder. So he did the math on how you have to construct a ramp. It would have to zigzag through the front yard, has to have a landing every so many feet, and he did the math. It would have to be 100 feet long. I am not going to quibble with somebody that does this for a living. In addition, if the concern is that the Grandma Ward is going to turn tail and run and not want to live here, we can have her sign an affidavit that says that she will live in this home with Dave and Kim.
And we appreciate what a handsome couple she and her husband are that you left on the
This is
screens.
Dave. This is Dave and his mom.
Did I say husband? I meant son, of course. Yes. I take it that his father has passed on.
Exactly.
Yeah, she appears to be a lovable woman, and he appears to be a wonderful person. Of course, we have to make our decisions without respect to the persons.
Except
who are
for the
making
ADA.
We must consider their disabilities, but not how attractive they are.
If it makes you feel better, I'll put up a map again.
Did I interrupt your presentation?
No, I just wanted to make sure that if the concern is that she is not going to live here, if you agree with this variance, you could make it a condition of approval that she does.
For the duration of the variance?
No, obviously, once you make, the ADA allows you to make permanent accommodations, permanent changes to an existing property. Yes,
we can do it.
Yes.
The question is, must we do it?
Under the ADA, you must.
Not if there's an alternative way, right?
And the alternative no, that is not actually a test.
I mean, one alternative way would be to put an electric lift.
Mr. Chair, if we're going to discuss the ADA, I'm going to get my ADA expert on it.
We might as well make a good record here.
Good morning. My name is David Schenko, and I'm an attorney also with Vander, Gillen & Miller, and I'm a law partner with Corey Land. I'm also licensed in the state of Wisconsin, and I'm a resident of River Falls and have lived there for about 15 or 16 years. We were talking about the ADA, so there's two different provisions under federal law that apply to this particular case. So there's the ADA which is the American with Disabilities Act, and then also the FHAA, which is the Fair Housing Amendments Act. And although they're two different acts, they work in concert and have a lot of similarities, so we kind of use them interchangeably to some degree. Under the ADA and the FHAA, there needs to be a reasonable accommodation for individuals with disabilities with a government or a zoning entity to make changes to the rules, including to residential homes. There's a few different components to this. The first component is the person disabled? And the answer is yes, Edith is disabled under the ADA and the FHAA. We have a stipulation with the staff from St. Croix County that Edith is considered disabled. I would want everyone to, if they need to reference, we have a fairly lengthy ADA memo that was provided in both the August packet and the September packet. It's the same memo. There's attachments in the October packet that include photos and measurements, and that's mainly what those photos show, are just kind of the widths of different doorways. There's also an image in there of Edith's disabled person sticker from the state of Massachusetts. So she has a disabled placard that she has to put in her vehicle. But the point is that we don't need to discuss whether or not Edith is disabled. Everyone agrees that she is. So the ADA and the FHAA thus apply. The current home is not accessible for Edith for several reasons. The first is that you have a 5-foot difference from the ground floor to the main entrance into the home. So how do you get a person up 5 feet? Well, the answer is either 100-foot long, zigzaggy ramp, or you could do a lift. So we're talking about doing a lift. It's smaller, it's more discreet. It's not as big as an elevator. We're talking about a small ramp or a small lift that would go inside the garage. Under certain standards for ADA and people with disabilities, your hallways must be 36 inches wide. As you can see from the photos and then in the measurements in the memo, the hallways aren't 36 inches wide. So that's why we need to make those hallways wider. Doors must have 32 inches of clear space in order to move a wheelchair through, which is what Edith uses along with a walker. The door to the bedroom is 29 inches. So we have a problem with the bedroom. We have a problem with the bathroom. We have a problem with the fact that there's not enough turning radius within the bathroom to move around. You need to have 36 inches to get into the shower or the bathroom entrance. Right now, in one of the images that Corey showed, the bathroom entrance is 23 inches wide, plus there's a lip. So because of the shape of the home and the large chimney, there's just not enough room in order to make the accommodations that we need for Edith to live there. I gave you just the high-level overview of ADA and the FHAA. As you can probably guess, there's significant case law in the federal courts regarding these requirements. There's two cases that really stand out that I think are very applicable here. Both of them come from the Federal Court of Appeals 7th Circuit. So that's the circuit that the state of Wisconsin is in, meaning that the decisions that we're getting from the 7th Circuit would be decisions that would be binding here. The two is a case called Dadian versus Village of Willamette. Dadian is spelled D-A-D-I-A-N. Willamette is W-I-L-M-E-T-T-E. If you want the case site, for the federal reporters, I'd be happy to provide that. It's a 2001 7th Circuit decision, and the facts of that one are similar enough that I think it requires some discussion. In that particular case, the homeowners wanted to reconstruct a garage and a driveway in the front of their home. The zoning ordinances prohibited that. It said you had to have all of that behind the house, not in the front of the house, on the front of the street. But because of osteoporosis and problems with walking, the owners wanted to have the parking spot and the garage in the front of the house so they could more easily get into the home. The Village of Willamette denied their request for an exception, basically their version of a variance. It went up on appeal to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, and the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals cited and affirmed the decision from the jury, which is that's discrimination. The village had to make a reasonable accommodation for the Dadians and allow the Dadians to have their driveway and their garage in the front of the house, despite the fact zoning said you can't. So what I find important out of this particular case is that the ADA and the FHAA apply to zoning requirements. They apply to townships and smaller entities, not just the state government. They apply to residential zoning as opposed to, say, commercial zoning. And they also allow the creation of permanent structures. Again, this was to create a parking space and a garage in the front of the home as opposed to in the back of the home. Some of the conclusions are that when there's a disability, the public entity must reasonably accommodate by making changes to the rules, policies, and practices. So when there's a person with a disability, there has to be something that would accommodate them. And the whole boils down to a reasonable accommodation. That's when we go to the next case. And that case is Oconomowoc Residential Programs Incorporated versus the City of Milwaukee. That is also a federal case from the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. It was decided 1 year after Dadian, so it was decided in 2002. And this one is a little bit different in facts, but I'll tell you the facts and I'll tell you kind of the conclusion and why this one's also important. In Oconomowoc, the plaintiff was an organization, but there were also individuals that joined the lawsuit. And they had wanted to build basically a group home within the City of Milwaukee. The City of Milwaukee zoning ordinance prohibited it. It says you can't build a group home in this residential area because of its location in proximity to another group home. So there was a distance requirement or a spacing requirement of 2,500 feet between group homes. And in Oconomowoc, their group home that they had wanted to build would have been too close to another group home. The City of Milwaukee denied that variance request, basically saying, no, you have to comply with our zoning. And yeah, it's a group home for individuals with disabilities. It was people with traumatic brain injuries and developmental disabilities, all of which are disabled under the ADA and the FHAA. And in that particular case, it was a variance request that was denied. That variance request was then brought into the federal courts as a civil lawsuit against the City of Milwaukee for violations of the ADA and the FHAA. Ultimately, the plaintiffs, the owners of the Oconomowoc Residential Programs Incorporated, they went up on appeal to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, again, the same circuit that Wisconsin is in, and they upheld the decisions ultimately of the jury. What is interesting about Oconomowoc is it has to do with the burdens of proof for proving that something is a reasonable accommodation. Under Oconomowoc, it says that the burden is initially on the plaintiffs, and in this case, the names are a little different, but it would be on the wards. So wards would have the initial burden of proof to show that the accommodation they want is a reasonable one. And once they have made that showing, then the burden shifts to the defendant, or, again, the names are not perfect in this particular case, but it would then shift to the county to prove that it is an unreasonable accommodation. Or that so I'm going to read from the case. So once the accommodation is reasonable, the burden then shifts to the defendant. And, quote, they must come forward to demonstrate unreasonableness or undue hardship in the particular circumstances, end quote. Our position is that we have put forth in our plans reasonable accommodations for a person with disabilities by allowing having a lift inside a garage and having the stairs inside the garage to get them up the 5 feet to the main living level, and to have the doors and the hallways and the bathrooms and the showers all the appropriate size, the appropriate clearances, in order for a person with disabilities to live and be able to live on one floor within the home. Again, bringing from the basement, bringing the laundry room and kind of the pantry up to the main living level. So under those two cases we just discussed, Dadian and Oconomowoc, I think they tell us a few things. They tell us that the ADA and the FHAA apply, and they apply to this particular case, that because Edith is disabled, there has to be some reasonable accommodation. We believe that what we've put forth is the reasonable accommodation. So now the burden would then shift to the county and say that, no, it's an unreasonable accommodation, or there's undue hardship on the county in the particular circumstances. And we don't believe that there's undue hardship on the county. This isn't something that requires the county a lot of oversight to accomplish. This isn't a request that changes the nature of the zoning. I mean, this is a zoned residential. It's going to be used by residents. It's not turning into a group home. It's not turning into something different. It's still a home for people. It just so happens that a person with a disability, intends to live here, and under the federal law, the person with the disability gets to choose where they live. We can't make that choice for them. Edith wants to live in this home with her son and her daughter-in-law, and the law allows that a reasonable accommodation for her to have that. While doing my legal research, I came upon an interesting quote from 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. And I'll read the quote. For example, if a city required all houses to have narrow doorways and the city failed to waive this requirement, this might harm people in wheelchairs by reason of the fact that they are in wheelchairs. In such a case, the city would be required to waive this rule for wheelchair-bound residents, wherever such waiver was reasonable. This requirement to reasonably accommodate would exist regardless of the motivation behind the narrow doorway rule. So, taking that comment or that example into our particular case, there's rules on how big a home can be, how much a home can expand, and in this case it can't because of the various ordinances. And all we're asking for is a reasonable accommodation so Edith Ward can live in the home that she chooses. So I'd be happy to try to answer any questions about the ADA or the FHAA.
This probably isn't a legal question, but why is it that the lift needs to be in the garage rather than outside? Are there not exterior versions of platform lifts such as you propose to put in the garage?
That's a great factual question, and I think I'd have to turn to the builder and the designer on that particular issue.
Yeah, you just happen to be there at the podium. I'm just being opportunistic. I'm sure there's somebody else who's better capable of answering that.
And again, keep in mind that the current garage doesn't have an internal structure, doesn't have internal stairs. So what we're trying to do is put stairs in there, and even if you put stairs in there, well, now you're bumping out, even without the lift. Having internal stairs will force you to lose a parking space. So on the option that we had created, the lift is behind the stairs, so the lift itself isn't taking up any more space. And another thing that I think that's important, I don't know if I can find.
Well, I think your predecessor, Attorney Land, made the point that the caretaker needs a path to get to the top or bottom simultaneously with the lift operation so that they're there in a contemporaneous fashion with the arrival of the disabled person. But I'm wondering why there are two decks outside the garage that lead to two stairways that lead to the deck, or lead from the deck, depending whether you're going up or down. Why couldn't a lift be placed either on the stairway, as I see examples on televisions, or adjacent to it if it's a platform lift that's preferred?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, it's because we live in Wisconsin. To protect it from the elements, to protect the disabled person from the elements is reasonable. That's why it's inside the garage.
But when you take the person to the doctor for a visit, they'll have to be transported some distance through the parking lot, subjected to our fierce storms and rainy weather. Does that mean that every hospital has to have a covered parking lot?
No, I don't think so, but I'd also point out that every hospital I've ever been to has all of their elevators inside and not an exterior elevator that's, the elevator itself is open to the elements. So what we're asking for is just a lift that's inside. Again, pointing to the screen where we have the...
Now, we see covered lifts in our applications for lifts to get to and from the river level, up and down a bluff. which provide shelter for a person sitting in the lift.
And I know what you're referring to, and I've seen lifts that are inside homes that are similar. Why I'm showing you this particular slide is that the lift is here. It does not take up any more room. The garage is not designed in order to accommodate the lift. The garage is designed to accommodate interior stairs. It's just that we were able to put the lift, in line with the stairs themselves. And keep in mind that the garage, you saw the photos, it's a small garage. There's not a lot of room for a person in a wheelchair to be able to move from a door around the vehicle, and then whether it's by a stair lift or a vertical lift, they still need to get around. So that's why we, in this particular drawing, designed the garage so it's a little bit bigger to allow a person in a wheelchair or a walker to be able to walk around the vehicles. And I believe the builder, in designing this particular slide, used scale models of the actual vehicles that the wards own. So they own a pickup truck and a Subaru. So this is as close as we can get to show you what the garage would look like, once it's completed with vehicles parked in there. So again, the lift is internal, but the shape of the garage wasn't designed around that. It was designed around the fact that we want to have internal stairway and accommodate around the vehicles.
I think I understand the position of your applicant that they want this to be under a roof. They want the person to enter and exit a vehicle under a roof and never to go outside when they're at their home here. Do you have is there an ADA argument why the laundry room is being moved up to the upper floor? I just kind of question why. I can't really believe the wards expect David's mother to be doing the laundry. I would be doing the laundry for my mother where she's living. So where is the undue hardship of having the laundry room remain in the basement? So much of this whole Plan A, well, both plans, is driven by this perception that the laundry room needs to be moved up to the same level as the bedroom that the lady is going to live in.
Keep in mind, again, the person with a disability gets to choose where they live. And we believe that she wants to live in a place that she can be able to live as freely as she can on her own. Obviously, she still has disabilities, but that doesn't mean she can't, cook her own meals. Obviously, from a wheelchair, we'd have to change the height of the counters to accommodate that. But to provide her as much flexibility as she can, but still needs to live with someone else.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I can add a little bit of context to the single-level living idea. So not all of the modifications are solely because of the ADA, as we pointed out. Single-level living here for future generations. The wards have lived here for 21 years. They intend to retire here and live here for another 21 years, at which time single-level living is kind of necessary. They're not going to want to maneuver the stairs themselves. So this preserves the home for them and for their future use as well. And it does it in a very reasonable, modest, minor way. So adding the laundry room upstairs is not necessarily solely for an ADA. Yes, Mrs. Ward is still very spry. Grandma Ward can still probably do her own laundry. But it's also for the wards to continue to live here on one level and be able to have all of the things that they need right here on this floor. Again, it's a small ask.
So you say. Anything else? So now, Mr. Cheezit, well, I should ask, are there other people in the room who want to speak in favor of this application?
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Board. My name is Dave Ward. I'm the owner of this property. So although we've talked quite a bit about my mother living with us, we have Kim's parents also in due course will need to be caretakers of them as well as they're getting later in life. And so I truly believe that we're asking for minimal accommodation that's extremely reasonable in changing the house to make us be able to take care of our elderly parents and also take care of ourselves into the future. And so we spent quite a bit of time, as my attorney Corey said, we've been at this since April, thinking about this, frankly, for a couple of years on how to proceed forward. Spent an outrageous amount of money to get to this point to find something that we're really trying to accommodate with the county, with the desires of the national park, with the desires of the DNR. We live on the river, have lived on the river, love the river, aren't looking to do anything to our property or to the riverscape itself whatsoever, and in fact happen to be the only residents at the end of that dirt road because we acquired the property across the street because there were residents there who were not of the same ethics about the river or the easement or of the national park as we were, and now we have solved that problem as well for ourselves and for future generations. So I believe we're making reasonable requests, and I'd love to have a conversation with either the county land use planning group or with the board itself on how to move forward. I need to get my mother into the house. She's going to be living with us. I need to solve this. Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder, is it because you bought that other property that the Park Service thanked you for being such a fine steward? Or were they just including boilerplate in their letter?
No, I think not. So I've been working with the national park as a friendly neighbor, giving them access to the river, because there's a dirt path that you've seen perhaps on the maps. National Park's put in there. National Park owns that plot of property next to me. They've done a full prairie restoration within the last 10 years. They need to access my property, and I work with them as well, both on animal counting, bird counting, and giving them access to my property as well. And so the National Park and I are actually quite good neighbors.
That's great. I think I actually toured your property one time when the prairie restoration was younger, a few years back, and it's got a good diversity of plants.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Very nice, very nice.
And we've actually taken, although it's not part of this plan, we've taken 2 10-acre parcels of ours and put those into prairie restoration as well. Oh. And working with the same operators, I'll call it that, and researchers of that national park property to make sure all local native seeds have been planted.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anybody else to speak in favor of this application? Well, anybody in the room who wants to speak in opposition to this application? And then be fired? And anybody who is neither for nor against, but has some comment to make to help us to a better decision? No? I guess we turn back to your staff, or you, Mr. Cheez-It. Are you going to take a position now, or?
Sure, and then Jared has some findings of fact and conclusions of law, but Corp Counsel Heather here also can take and provide some clarification on the ADA law, if you would like.
Do you wish to speak?
Yes.
All right, go ahead. Now, I did not waive the attorney-client privilege on the legal advice that you sent to all the board members. And board members, I might as well at this very point mention it, that we postponed this month last meeting because Ms. Amos had not had the opportunity due to various illnesses in the staff and things to prepare a memorandum of law. She did prepare that, and I was asked whether the applicant's request to have a copy of that opinion should be granted, which would require us to waive the attorney-client privilege of advice being given to us by our lawyers. I declined to waive the attorney-client privilege and have a copy provided to the applicants. It raised a new question for me that I have not faced before, and I declined it on 2 grounds. First of all, that I wasn't sure that I had the authority to waive the attorney-client privilege without the support of a majority of you after some discussion. And secondly, that I didn't think it was a sound thing to do at that stage. So that advice you got has not been delivered to the public nor to the applicants. So as Heather speaks now, she'll probably still be preserving the attorney-client privilege by not getting into the same matters that she discussed for us. It's yours, Mrs. Amos.
Thank you. I just wanted to touch up on something that Attorney Land indicated regarding modifying our code to address additional reasonable accommodations. If the board were to look at Wisconsin Administrative Code NR 118.09 paren 3, that is the reasonable accommodations for disabled persons section of the code that the DNR promulgates based on Wisconsin statute 30.27. It is what our ordinance is drafted off of, and we follow the regulations set forth in NR 118.09. And I just want to note one of the things that is indicated in that section. It does indicate that local zoning authorities may not issue variances to disabled persons unless the statutory variance criteria in 59.694 paren 7C are satisfied. And the note to that section indicates that the issuance of a variance is not the appropriate mechanism for granting reasonable accommodations that are required because of a person's disability, because under Wisconsin law, variances can only be granted based on the unique characteristics of the property. So that's why you need to address the 3 variance requirements first, and depending on what you determine in regards to the variance requirements, that may or may not require you to then address reasonable accommodations. But it is 2 different standards, 2 different things that you need to address. You have to address the variance criteria first for the, I believe, 3 variances that have been requested. And so does the property contain unique property limitations that would prevent compliance with the ordinance? Is conformity with the regulations unnecessarily burdensome? And then 3, does the granting of the variance result in harm to the public interest? And Attorney Land did indicate those during her presentation. So that is what you need to address first, and then there's different criteria if you deny the variances, whether or not reasonable accommodations would need to be met. And so those criteria are, have the applicants proven that the desired accommodation will affirmatively enhance a disabled individual's quality of life by ameliorating the effects of the disability, and whether waiver of the ordinance requirements would be so at odds with the purposes behind the regulations that it would be a fundamental and unreasonable change. So those are the standards. And again, I can repeat those if we get to that point, but I just wanted to clarify that there is a distinction between addressing the variance first, and then depending on your decision on that, then addressing reasonable accommodations.
Apparently, the county ordinance with respect to reasonable accommodations mentions only 3 types of physical structures. Do we have the authority to add a 4th one to that by variance to that ordinance? It's apparently a type of land use ordinance, and I'm not sure that and it's a part of the zoning ordinance, in the general sense, isn't it, the zoning code? And I gather that our brief probably overlaps that. First time I've ever had to think about it, of course. But supposing, I continue personally, and maybe nobody else in the room agrees with me, I know many people in the room disagree with me, but I continue to be somewhat attracted to the idea of a covered, sort of weatherproofed lift put adjacent to one of the existing exterior stairways. But that's not one of the three things that's listed in the ordinance. So do we have the authority to expand the remedies available in the ordinance for handicapped persons to allow the temporary placement of a special kind of lift there is what's floating in and out through my mind. Maybe it's unfair to catch you off base with a question like that. Looks like Mr. Weiner has an opinion too.
Yeah, I would say that one could argue that in what you're suggesting is temporary in nature, and so that would coincide with how the intent of that ordinance and admin code, that it is temporary and that it could be removed once the affidavit's been satisfied.
Yeah. Now, you are of the opinion that the DNR, if given a chance to comment on this modified option A with the corner cut off the garage kind of, would send us to the same, would write a letter that would reach the same conclusions and for the same reasons, are you not?
Yes.
And Chair, if I can just expand on that. I don't know if all the board members have the opinion of the DNR, but I think that should be included in the packet. And one of the comments that Mr. Wenholz indicated is that option B, now this is not the modified option B, this is the original option B, is more modest than option A, and the board will have to decide if option B represents the minimum relief necessary. So that's another aspect that the board can address today, is whether or not the request of modified option B is the minimum relief necessary for what is being requested, and that would go to the hardship request under the variance criteria.
Thank you. I'm certain that we are confusing the record now. The option presented to us today is really a modified option A. I think it's safer to say. Is that not right, Mr. Weiner?
We call it a B+.
Yeah, I mean, the habitable space matches that of the initial option A, the garage space, option B, and the garage space matches that of so initially, when this was submitted, in the very bottom left-hand corner of one of the plans, they showed a footprint for a garage that matches this footprint that's before you now. But it was not part of the ask. The ask initially was for the garage to be squared off. And so that wasn't part of the initial packet way back in June, as it was something that they'd shown, but they didn't address in any of their narratives or anything like that. So
there, Mrs. Land.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As long as the Corporation Council brought up the standard of minimum relief necessary, because it's a phrase that's repeated in the DNR letter, and it was even brought up at the last August meeting. It is not in your ordinance that a variance be the minimum relief necessary. It's not in state law that the variance be the minimum relief necessary. It's a nice catchphrase. And apparently it's been used as a standard, as a rule, and averred to be the law, and we can't grant anything but. But I looked at the footnote in the materials last time. It's referring to a treatise. A treatise is written by an expert, but just a lawyer, who says, hey, this is a good idea. You should have a standard that says minimum relief necessary, but you have to adopt that as a jurisdiction, either in state law, or in case law or federal law. Somewhere it has to be a law in order to apply it as a test or a rule or adhere to it as a standard or requirement. And it's not. It's a good goal. It's a nice catchphrase. but it is not the state of law in the state of Wisconsin. And if you try to apply minimum relief necessary as a standard, as a finding, you are setting up the perfect case scenario for being arbitrary and capricious. I don't want to appeal this case. Yes, we're setting a great record. We really are. But the wards don't want to have to appeal it.
I take this view. The words minimum relief are a way of trying to create a little bit more objectivity in the meaning of hardship or practical difficulties, because in the context of what is a hardship, boards like us always have to look at what is being requested. Is it outrageously large, to take the other extreme? And in that case, there's no hardship if the applicant is asking for, let us say, an expansion for 37 more bedrooms. We'd say, no, there's no hardship in having to live in a house that doesn't have 39 bedrooms, the existing 2 plus 37 more. So the term minimal relief seems to me to be a catchphrase, I think you maybe used the word, that is a way to understand objectively what we mean by hardship. So just now that we got that out and into the record, in case we need it on appeal, there it is. My best effort from one retired small-town lawyer. Is there anything else that you wanted to get on the record or to say or persuade us with?
Mr. Chair, I appreciate the opportunity to continue the public hearing, and I would ask that you not close it, just in case there is any additional information that you need, whether it be from us or from the applicants. But I ask that you apply the actual statutory test to the variance and not try to wiggle room words into it. Unnecessary hardship has a test, and it's whether it's unduly burdensome on the applicants and whether the conditions are unique to the property, that were not self-created. That's the unnecessary hardship test. That's what you're applying. The minimum variance necessary is not part of the test. I ask you to stick to the test because I think they meet it.
Are you still standing by the Rudder case?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I simply bring up the Rudder case to show that it's example on a variance that was a much larger ask, that felt like it was similar circumstances. I fully respect I've used those same words that Mr. Wozniak used. Every variance application is different. There are always unique facts. But these felt very, very similar, and their ask was so much bigger than this one. That's all I ask, is just compare.
I can't remember the Rudder case myself.
Mr. Chair, you were absent from the June meeting.
Oh, good.
So you didn't miss a thing. You were not present. It's not that your memory is faulty.
That's a relief. Nevertheless, I don't see us deciding this on the fly. Are you seriously advocating, Mr. Cheeseth, that your staff would not come to a recommendation with proposed findings of fact and conclusions if we gave you time to work on it?
I'm not saying that, Mr. Chair. Just a little bit different in process. We've had, an hour and a half of testimony and that from the applicant and their agents. And so Jared here is willing to walk the Board of Adjustment through findings of fact, creating findings of fact and conclusions of law. And he's got that prepped but we just wanted to be able to hear the facts, and I think he's actually made a few changes since he's heard their comments about ADA and applicants' needs. So So now he is ready to go through and provide you with some of those findings.
Please,
and
please
conclusions.
hold that thought, Mr. Weiner. It looked like there was another person from the applicant's portion of the room here that wished to speak. Let's hear from this person.
Thank you. I'm Chris Koss with First Choice Builders, again, working with the wards on the design. So I wanted to present myself if you guys had any questions. From my side of it is we've been working for a long time to basically accommodate the things that the wards needed, that we believe are reasonable and that would aesthetically tie in with the house. A minimal expansion is hard to make look good. And I think, aesthetics is an important part of what your house looks like for value and that sort of thing. So basically, we worked a lot with different options for what we've presented. I think going back and forth with the staff since April and getting phone calls and can we change this? Can we do this? Can we make these new elevations? So again, I just wanted to make myself available for any questions. And again, my input of the design is, I take the challenges that we have with custom building and remodeling and just try to accommodate as many as we can. And again, doing what I'm asked to do, but also available with questions. It is a uniquely designed structure, which was challenging to draw in order to get the renderings to help you guys visualize it. So smaller additions are just going to look like little things attached. So we did spend a bit of time on, again, making it still look aesthetically pleasing. And I personally, believe with the variances and that kind of stuff, it's the intent of the codes, which I think early on we brought up with Jared. So again, that's my opinion when I deal with this and other things, to ask that you guys kind of look at the intent of the different things. So again, the challenging with the structure and the layout, and if you guys have any questions for me as the builder.
Questions for Mr. Koss? No. I realize that I forgot to put identifications on the two exhibits that were given to us earlier in the day. Let's do that at this time. The certified survey map will be our next number in the list of exhibits. Whatever
Mr.
that-
Chair, I can go through the whole exhibit list if you would like.
I just need the next number.
I believe it's 8 and 9, right?
Let's see, if I back up, I guess, through, well, I'm gonna start from the other end. If you don't do that, I'm gonna start from 100 and call one of them 100 and the other 99. But that'll,
Well, and that Heather here has clarified that it'd be 10 and 11.
oh, great. Okay, that's all we need. So the certified survey map will be 10, and the topographic map, I guess I could call it, it's labeled property information, and it's by GNS Land well, they're both by GNS Land Solutions. That doesn't help. It's called property information, will be number 11. Just a little housekeeping there. Board members, it seems to me we've got a situation here that's not ripe for decision. I don't think we have clarity, and I don't think we will be successful if we let Mr. Weiner try to do it on the fly here. And it seems to me that there are 3 more things that I at least would like to know. And one is I'd like to see a DNR response to this new thing and get the DNR on record. Are they supporting a grant, or are they opposing this exact proposal that we now have before us? Secondly, what does the Rudder case have to say to us? Recognizing now we're being told that although never binding, it is persuasive, a distinction that Ms. Amos will recognize. And we can't evaluate that unless you all remember Rudder and I get up to speed on Rudder. And I'd like to see a comparison made by Mr. Weiner before we make that decision, before we make our decision. And thirdly, I'm thinking that I don't see a hardship yet if that outbuilding is capable of taking one more car. If they can park one of their cars in it, then I don't think that's so unreasonable. So I've got those three things that I would propose that we put this off till next month. Give the staff a chance to, A, pick up those three things, and B, organize a set of findings of fact and conclusions of law that is a coherent analysis of the whole thing in a succinct way. That if we want to do it, we can say we adopt this. If we don't want to do it, we say, that's the part I need to change right there. I don't agree with that staff recommendation paragraph right there. Rather than flitting back and forth over presentations that we've had over 2 different months now.
Speaking to that, do we need another month? Can it be done sooner than that?
So function of the staff's ability to respond,
I mean, this sounds like it's getting dragged out a long ways.
Yes, we've obviously missed this construction season.
Mr. Chair, if I could just comment, the getting a prompt, we can't be sure we could get a prompt response from Mr. Wenholz with the DNR. He always has a lot on his plate. We can request that for sure. We can certainly brief you and the board on the particulars of the rudder request and the variance granted in that instance. So that isn't going to require a whole lot of preparation on our part. We have a good record on that.
And you can go out and look at the shed, and
Well, yes, and
Mr. Koss could walk you through it.
I can address the garage,
yeah.
so I'm prepared to do that.
Okay, board members, do you, I don't know, are you feel this is ready for your decision? Are you ready to hear a recommendation from Mr. Weiner and decide today? Or do you want to put it off until the staff has stuff ready for us?
Well, may I interject? What I'm going to present to you isn't going to be what you think it's going to be.
Oh,
So,
all right. Well, then let's take a bathroom break. Well, I don't like mysteries. Why is that?
it's not a mystery. So, I mean, it's
Then tell us what it,
I guess-
describe what you want to present.
the process in which which staff has operated for the board in the past has put staff in a very awkward position. And so you essentially want us to make a decision for you in some cases, and that's not what staff's job is.
No, we don't want you to make a decision for us, and I
So by
do reject that
drafting
utterly.
a decision document for you beforehand can be viewed as that. Regardless if I know the board is able to make their decisions on their own, but the optics and how we operate may suggest otherwise to somebody who's not familiar with our processes.
So you're unable to provide us draft findings and conclusions.
I have prepared some findings for you. They are the facts that what we believe to be the facts of the case for you that are ready. I've broken it up into 3 sections. And so we have the findings, we have the conclusions of law, and then there's the decision.
And it's the facts that you have ready for us.
We have some facts, yes. And if there's additional facts that we have found here today that you would like to be added, we are able to add those to that.
Through group drafting, in which I suggest the word should be bigger, and David says the word should be larger, and somebody else says a different way, and we all try to draft together. That is, I don't like that at all, in a matter that may very well be appealed.
It is clunky, I agree. But if the board makes a decision, I think that we could, as staff, draft language that reflects the board's will in the conclusions of law, as well as a decision.
And then you'd have that ready for us by a certain date?
Right, we would adopt, and then that's where you would adopt that, yeah. And if there's any changes that you would like to be made at that time that are, I'll say, insignificant to the outcome, we can make those.
Well, it'd be new direction for us, but then we've had some innovation over the last couple of months, 3 months. I'm going to declare a bathroom recess. The clock says it's 11:21, and I'm going to call us back at 11:30. It's 11:33 and we are resuming. Anything from the board members? Nope. Mr. Weiner?
Okay, so before I go with the findings of fact, I just want to make a correction with Attorney Land. And it's not part of this case, but I just want to clarify just for the record. And it shouldn't be really into your consideration today because it's not about the accessory structure. But the accessory structure, the two-car garage, it would be allowed to be reconstructed, even though it is a non-conforming structure, accessory structure. It would allow to be reconstructed because it is outside of the 75-foot setback. And that could just be done through a land use permit. If it were within the 75-foot setback, it would be limited to 500 square feet. So if they wanted something larger, then they would have to come back for a variance. All right. So we have a draft, findings of fact, conclusion of law, and decision before you here. So what we have found as being facts of the case, David and Kim Ward are the owners. The site is addressed at 301 221st Avenue in Somerset. The site consists of one principal structure, the dwelling, 3 accessory structures, the detached garage, shed, and the deck. The property is now 2.533 acres in size with the new certified survey map that's been filed. The applicant filed a completed application for these series of variances to expand the legal nonconforming principal structure on May 1st, pursuant to conditional uses and variance procedures of the Riverway. The principal structure in question is classified as a legal nonconforming structure due to the structure being located within 75 feet of the ordinary high water mark. The structure is located partially within the slope preservation zone as established by the Lower State Croix Riverway District. And the structure is located within the 25-foot property line setback as established by the Lower St. Croix River Overlay District. The principal structure in question was constructed in 1970 prior to the enactment of the Lower St. Croix Riverway Overlay District. The site is subject to a National Park Service easement which was purchased by the United States federal government on February 5th, 1979. I do have one addition here. Whether you accept it or not is entirely up to you as a board. But on let me just get to the page here. Some of the doorways in the home, it should be noted that what was submitted to us on September 18th shows the doorways of the home being 30 inches, with the exception of the bedroom being 50 inches, and the doorway between the garage and the dwelling being 36 inches. Some of the doorways, like for example, between the laundry room and the bathroom are 28 inches.
I heard a distant voice in the room. Does that cause you to change your testimony, Mr. Weiner?
I mean, it's labeled in inches, so like 30 by 68. So while it doesn't say 30 by 68, that's what those mean. So if it's something different, then we need to have something updated, or like nothing was updated, or shows that. So
Standard, Chris Cost with First Choice. Standard door labels are feet and inches, so 3068 is 3 foot 0 inches wide by 6 foot 8 inches tall. There's not 36 inches or 30 inches. That's how this software and is a standard labeling practice for doors. So the door going out to the, oopsies, that's not how mine works. This is a 3'6" door. So a 42-inch wide door going out for the space of the wheelchair. And final plans would have a handicap sill, so you could roll over it. Again,
Let the record show that Mr. Koss is pointing out the exterior doorway from the house structure to the garage structure.
so
Proceed.
just clarifying the labels.
thank you. That's all we had for the findings then.
To reach the conclusion on that, Mr. Weiner, are you satisfied that the print meets the requirements of submission to your office?
Yeah, we don't have a requirement, we don't look at the interior of the home. And so that's why that hasn't been brought up recently. I mean, our concern is with the exterior of the home and those features.
Did you want the board to draw a conclusion from your statements about the width of the doorways? What was that?
That would be entirely up to you. I don't believe that it's necessary given how he's explained it.
Can we consider that whole line of discussion as withdrawn?
Sure. we
And
can
not
withdraw it
not
from the
needing
record.
the board to rule on it? Okay.
So is there any additional facts that the board would like to add that they have found today?
This whole structure is with, I have a letter from the DNR August 23rd addressing David and Kimberly Ward. In here, they talk about a secondary reason for this request of the applicant wants to make is unable as a residential existing non-conforming principal structure attached structure. The deck and both the slope preservation and the ordinary high water mark setback. Is all of that in the whole building in high water mark?
So let's go to answer your question. So here, with the exception of the 25-foot side yard setback that's on the bottom here, everything else is accurate. And so the bluff line, the top of the bluff, runs through the home, so that makes it as part of the slope preservation, partially within the slope preservation zone, as well as the deck. The ordinary high water mark here, it is 73.6 inches from the home itself is from the ordinary high. While I would personally conclude that because shoreline was in place when this house was constructed, so the ordinary high water mark may not have been in that location at the time of construction, they may have built it exactly at 75 feet. And so over time, rivers meander, and now we're no longer within the 75. Or now we are within 75, we're not outside the 75. So both, to answer your question, yes, both the house and the deck are within 75 foot.
To your knowledge, does this ever flood?
The St. Croix River, yes, it does flood.
I mean, this property?
The floodplain elevation here is indicated in this darker line, dashed line here. So that is where FEMA has indicated. So I believe it's, I'd have to go back and look. I don't know what the actual floodplain elevation is on this site off the top of my head. But I do believe that the submitted materials indicate the correct location of the floodplain on the property.
I think it was your intention, or it remains your intention, to make presentations with respect to the deck and the
And the stairway.
stairway, yes.
Those are independent issues. While the deck is related to this issue, the deck regardless needs a variance to be reconstructed in one form or another.
Mm-hmm. So we would need to have a hearing with respect to the deck and with respect to the stairway.
That is correct. Which we have in the public hearing notice for today.
We have always before had a hearing and then closed a hearing and not reopened a hearing for another part of an application. So I think we should stick to that order of procedure and have the hearing with regard to the deck and the stairway. And after that is over, then we will close the hearing, and it will be the point at which we take no more testimony from the audience and receive no more documents. Board members disagree? See a better way?
So would you like me to proceed with the variance for the deck then? That's what I understand.
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So this one is a little different than other deck applications that we have reviewed and considered before the board here, as the outcome is reliant on the decision made by you on the variance to construct or to modify the principal structure and to add to that footprint. So I have a few pictures provided by the applicant. They were able to provide them a little bit better for you in the PowerPoint, but it still gives you the same idea. The deck is in disrepair and does need to be, it's just past its life, its useful life. And so this is the original current footprint outlined in blue of the deck. While the area under the roof is part of the principal structure, the limitations of the software that I was using and didn't allow me to go that far. So that part is considered to be part of the principal structure, while the reverse C shape is the structure that we're talking about here for the deck. So if option A were to be approved, this would be the new footprint of the deck. The deck would still remain in portions of the slope preservation zone and still would be within the 75-foot setback of the ordinary high water mark. And that would be the case for all of the potential options. This is the footprint here for the modifications for the original option B. And this is the modifications here for the the modified version of option B. They're essentially identical. So here again, I just went through the performance standards for accessory structures. So I'm just indicating that the deck is located approximately 61 feet from the ordinary high. It is located within the 75-foot ordinary high mark and the 40-foot bluff setback, as it's located in the slope preservation zone. And this is here where the deck would have to be made visually inconspicuous per the code. So that's the long and short on the deck here.
Under the screened-in porch underneath, does that have to be excavated in there? Does it have to be digging in there for footings or something?
I would imagine that they would have to meet the current deck standards, so yeah, those footings may have to be replaced. I don't know if that would require machined excavation. Certainly it would require human excavation by hand. If that was a concern, that is a possibility that you may put that as a condition should you wish to approve the variance for reconstructing the deck.
Other questions from the board members? No? Anybody in the room want to speak to this one? Why don't we'll save our options. The hearing will be still open. Let's proceed to discussion of the stairway.
All right. For the stairway, there's a little bit of history with this. Staff was notified by the National Park Service initially regarding this property because there was some significant tree cutting and vegetation removal. So the NPS, from the records that we have, NPS met with the wards on July 19th, 2019 to follow up with their letter notifying of the easement and the limitations that came with that. Staff did send a letter as well on May 17th and a follow-up letter on June 18th. On July 18th, staff met with the property owner on the site where staff inspected the vegetation removal and the stairway and indicated that the stairway was replaced without a conditional use. A follow-up letter outlining those findings was sent on August 30th. That they needed to have that, they need to submit the CUP. Staff determined while on site that the vegetation removed was dead or dying, and it was also removal of invasive species. So a condition in the August 30th letter was placed to not further disturb the slope without without consulting staff. And to what I can find, they have met that condition. So on May 14th, staff followed up on 2021. Staff followed up with the wards again, and they did reply, but at that point, it looks like it was dropped off due to I guests due to staff turnover. So this is a picture on top here from MPS on in 2018. This is a picture here. I tried to get similar pictures, but they didn't get similar ones. So this is from the staff visit in 2019. The mid-level vegetation had been removed, and so you can see that in this picture here. So it's all lower vegetation, and then the tree was still remaining. And then this is the picture here that's submitted to staff with the application. I would say that I indicate that in the report, that it looks pretty similar to what it looked like in the 2018 photo. And so that it appears the property owner has followed the condition listed by staff in the letter August 30th, 2019. So a couple things with this being an after the fact, it is a little more difficult to modify. Oops, sorry, this mouse is getting a little crazy. So condition 7, or I should say performance standard 7, stairways shall be constructed or finished with a wood or stone, or shall be painted or stained with a earth tone color. The current silver unfinished metal isn't an approved color in the riverway. The stairway shall be visually inconspicuous and shall be located in the most visually inconspicuous location of the lot. I mean, the stairway is pretty conspicuous from the center line of the river because of the coloring. I believe that if the color were to be modified, that it would meet the inconspicuous requirement. Native vegetation shall be planted. The vegetation, well, it has started to come in again. It's just a wild vegetation, which is fine. And then the vegetation requires screening. For screening, I would say that with the new pictures that they provided, I would say that the vegetation is met. So I would correct that on the report. We don't have plans for the stairway, so we don't know if it was certified by a registered professional engineer or an architect, showing the components are securely anchored or to prevent shifting from causing or accelerated erosion. But the evidence being that this was installed in 2018, we don't have any evidence of erosion on the site. It's just that we just lack the plans.
You're suggesting the test of time has indicated that it, since no damage has occurred, it must have been installed correctly.
I would say that.
Board, applicants? That concludes your presentation then,
Yep.
Mr. Weiner, with respect to all the applications that we have received.
Correct.
Yep.
That was addressed in my addendum.
Is there anything you'd like to clarify, Ms. Land? It's 11:57. I close the hearing now. And at this point, we'll have only dialogue between the board and the staff, if any, and among the board members until we reach a conclusion. A clarification, Mrs. Amos. My understanding is that if we do not find the conditions satisfied for the granting of the variances based on, or having to do primarily with hardship unless the building is expanded, then our next level of inquiry is whether we find basis for variance based on the hardship of a disabled person's accommodation. Am I right on that?
And I wouldn't even label it as a variance. You are just granting a reasonable accommodation, which is technically a variance from the ordinance, but yes, you are and what I would recommend to staff is then that document be recorded with the Register of Deeds indicating that the reasonable accommodation was granted for XYZ. So there's some documentation to future boards, future zoning staff, future owners of the property that a reasonable accommodation was granted. Because it technically is a variance from the ordinance, it just doesn't meet the Wisconsin variance criteria.
Mm-hmm. Well, board members, that's kind of where I'm headed, I guess. I have a hard time getting over the hurdle that the property does not show the complete uniqueness or that one of a kind, because it looks quite flat and it is what it is. And in the context of does the building need to be expanded, is it not practical? Is it a practical difficulty to not have a larger building, to not have an expansion, were it not for the fact that a disabled person is going to be living there? That's the hurdle, I guess, for me. But then when I look at the reality that we've been offered an affidavit that a disabled person will live there as soon as the work can be done and all the necessary conditions satisfied to make it habitable for the lady, then it seems to me that it's not unreasonable to request that expansion and go on to put a lift in the garage and expand the garage so it's still a two-car garage, but nip the corner off the garage so that it's not extending further into the side yard. That all seems to me to then make sense. It'd take an awful lot of words to make that happen, but that's kind of my bottom line, I guess. How about the rest of you? Where are you at on this?
Yeah, I like modified option B as an as a end result, and how we get there, how we word it. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that I know you well enough from our many years together, Mr. Peterson, not to put words into your mouth, but you would probably reject this if it were a simple application to expand the building. But everything changes when it's going to be occupied by an older lady with infirmities and such.
The thing that concerns me is overriding the Riverways Act ordinances, and I'm having a hard time with that.
But of course, that's what the variances are about. If this were located on Bass Lake or Perch Lake or one of our other places, and we didn't have all those setback requirements and slope stuff, we do have some, but they're different and less onerous, less restrictive. We wouldn't be having to process a variance request in quite the severity, if you will, that we have here. In this business of the disabled person whose needs cannot be accommodated by any of our three usual methods is what makes it this such a unusual request for us. I suppose if they knew that we had the power, maybe some of those applicants who settled for a ramp might be requesting a variance, you know, to have the lift inside the garage type of thing that we're being asked for here. I worry a little bit that we'll be flooded with such applications, but then we all know every case is unique.
Well, I'm looking at the future use of this building too. Everybody's getting older, and with the narrow doors and narrow hallway and so forth. If somebody just even had a knee surgery, they couldn't get through the hallways with the supporting appliances. So I think it should be modified.
Of course, they can do a lot of modifications without any approval from us. You know, as long as they stay inside the shell.
Well, how do you get in the house?
Yeah, there's the exterior door there.
So,
Are you kind of tracking along this way, Mr. Nickum, or do you see this in a different way?
I am tracking along with what you just said earlier. As been brought up, we had a prior situation similar to this that we did approve. It was mentioned that it was unanimous. It was unanimous in the main project, but it wasn't totally unanimous in everything. But I don't know. These buildings are built a long time ago, and I have difficulty with not letting people improve them a little and expanding them. And it's, as the DNR mentioned here in this letter, it's not Riverside, it's not the Riverside that they're expanding.
Yeah.
Tell me, Mr. Chairman, what does it mean, this is in that DNR letter dated August 23rd. What does it mean here? The county has in the past used a permit and deed restriction approach for addressing Americans with Disabilities Act.
Well, there's this part of our ordinances that Ms. Amos has kind of summarized for us, and we heard it from Attorney Land also. There's this thing in the ordinances that doesn't concern us. It's a staff permit process. They go to the window and fill out an application. It doesn't come before the Board of Adjustments. It doesn't need it. And the affidavit says that this house is or will be inhabited by a handicapped person who needs accessibility modifications. And if they sign that affidavit, then there are things available just kind of automatically. They can have a ramp, for example. And when we drive around the county and we see a ramp in front of a house in a rural township, you know, that's governed by county zoning, that's what's happened. There's been a permit granted for that ramp for accessibility for a handicapped person. It's a temporary permit. When the handicapped person isn't there anymore, they have to remove that ramp. What's a little different here, well, several things are different, but one thing is the request that this handicapped person not have to be limited to a ramp, which would be long because it's 5 feet up from the ground to the house level. That would be outside, would probably be visible. It's hard to find a location that wouldn't be visible from the river, you know. And then they want it enclosed from the weather. Most of our county applicants don't make that request that it be enclosed in some way, and that's where I worry that we may be flooded with applications in the future by handicapped people who say, gee, having an exposed ramp out in the weather and having to navigate across my lawn a ways even to get to the foot of the ramp are not reasonable accommodations.
Well, this
But if
permit,
they have merit, we'll have to grant their applications, of course.
is that what the young lady was talking about early, about having the proof that this woman's going to live there?
She offered, yeah, something a little bit in addition to that. If we give the variance to allow that lift and structure inside the garage and expansion of the garage to accommodate it, if we give that, they won't need to use this permit process.
Okay.
But their attorney offered that they would submit a letter from the grandmother, as you called her, and make it a part of the record so there would be evidence that this is not all an academic exercise to provide an expanded place for the wards. This is all about accommodating his mother. I think if we go down that route and we grant the appropriate variances as an accommodation to the senior Mrs. Ward, that affidavit would be one of the conditions that we just put into the file, in part to distinguish it from other cases that might come up in the future.
Mr. Chair and members of the board, if I may, the applicant also offered up catching the additional, hardscape or the additional roof, and that to help address, and that their good intent and that for not being contrary to public interest. And I think that since this building is within the 75 and the 200-foot ordinary high water mark setback, that'd be another condition that the board could at least consider.
Yes, again, speaking only for myself, I assumed that. I wish they had also offered to deal with surface water management for the whole structure, for the whole lot, for the previous to the existing driveway and for the outbuildings and so on. Many times our applicants, if they're bringing in a landscaped architect or some other kind of firm to do some rain gardens and stuff like that, they say, well, if we're doing it for just a new surface, let's do it for the old also, and make the whole thing less erosion prone. We didn't get that offer, but that doesn't stop them from doing it in the future, and it sounds like they may be the appropriate kind of stewards who would initiate it on their own. Did you want to say something, Mr. Wozniak? It looked like you were reaching for your microphone button.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, the ward's site here is, it's you've got the bluff or steep slope from the river. Then it's pretty much tabletop flat, and so it's not a. The main erosion concern is just that slope down the river, down to the river, which at this point is pretty heavily vegetated. So I don't think we have. We want the rules met, and we want the water for the new surface area managed according to the rules, but we're not seeing a big potential for problem here, is all I'd say.
Yeah, and I noticed the land type looked like it was essentially sandy soil. It'll have a high infiltration rate, should be.
Many of the sites that the board looks at with these proposals are have slopes coming from every which direction, and sometimes multiple bluffs. There's a plateau, it slopes up again. That's not the situation with this one, is all I'd say.
Ms. Amos, assuming that we seem to be reaching a consensus here, do we need to highlight any things in the record in support of that, or is there enough in there already?
Chair, I would just ask, and maybe I can go through each of the criteria of the variance and see if there's a yes or a no, and then if we get to the reasonable accommodations, I can ask those two standards if they've been met, yes or no, and then I think that will help staff be able to draft the conclusions of law based on the answers to those questions, if that's the easiest way to try to go through this, to make sure we're meeting all the standards and we're addressing each one.
I think that would be beneficial to us.
Could we do something a little different first before you do that work? Because from what I guess what I've gathered from your discussion here, you're looking at a pathway, a potential pathway to approve the modifications that they're requesting. So I guess if the board, well, two of you weren't here, but the two of you were. We did initially recommend approval of the original version of option B, and we did have findings of fact and conclusion of law drafted for that recommendation. So I don't know if you guys have looked at that. It starts on page 46 of your packet.
I assume everybody's seen that and looked at that, and I guess I had assumed that, but it's important to not assume anything that might be wrong, that those words would still stand, and they support the conclusion that we're headed to, but not if they are read as supporting the conclusion that the variances are justified simply for expanding the building, and so on. Only on the basis that they support the handicapped person part of the application.
Well, I mean, if we want to go through that, you may find that it does not include the person. The conclusions do not. So I guess what I would recommend is I have an updated version that I showed you before of the findings. Number 16 here on page 50 would be the beginning of the conclusion of law, where we address unnecessary hardship. And staff drafted the dwelling to address unnecessary hardship. The dwelling was constructed prior to the enactment of the Lower St. Croix Riverway Overlay Zoning District, which constitutes as a hardship, as the structure does not meet the current regulations of the Riverway Overlay. We did go on to say that the agent has stated to the property owner's wishes to take care of the disabled parents is a hardship that should allow them to be granted a variance to expand the dwelling. A variance may be granted, however, a variance may only be provided the minimum relief necessary.
Yes, no, I would not be able to accept the language of the first bullet point, which essentially says that every dwelling constructed prior to the riverway, which is a current non-conforming but legal structure, has a hardship. I don't see the law that way.
Well, that's what we have for in the Economowoc case.
Mr. Chair, and I can see that this might be really timely in that to go through these conclusions of law. If you would like, our department and our staff can take and go through and create an updated findings list and conclusions that goes more to what the board's referring to with the reasonable accommodations for a disabled individual, and we can bring them back for your confirmation at your next meeting if you wish. But yet you could still act on it, and then that would give the applicant the direction and that they can move forward. But then that would allow us to create a really solid, defensible record. Just throwing that up as an option.
I like that option, with all due respect, Mr. Weiner, that first Ms. Amos would query us on the standards and make sure that we're all on board in the conclusions, and then the staff would backfill in future days to the exact wording of the findings that support those conclusions.
So it's my understanding then, if you don't believe that they don't meet the three-part test, we still need to have some language in there as to why it's not a hardship. And why that there's no unique property limitations, or if there are, and then no harm to the public needs to be addressed as well.
Yes, I think we're saying that we think there's a hardship when there's a disabled person living there, that it is a practical difficulty not to be able to expand this building to accommodate a disabled person.
Well, that's where the DNR is coming from, where the hardship can't fall onto the individual. That the hardship needs to come with the land, and then that's why we have what Heather's talking about with the 2 additional criteria. So I guess I would recommend leaving the person out of, the disabled person out of the unnecessary hardship in the findings that are adopted.
I can't track with that. The hardship is incident to the handicap, and the variance can only be granted because of the handicapped person residing there. That trumps, because of the Americans with Disability Act, that trumps the Riverway Ordinance and the typical standards of defining a hardship.
I would beg to differ, I guess. Because the 2 criteria that Attorney Amos is going to go over, those are the 2 overriding factors that can override the state law of what the unnecessary hardship is and what the physical limitations of the property are, as well as the no harm to public interest. So
I think we're going to have to agree to disagree.
Because if we were able to approve this variance utilizing these 3 criteria today, we wouldn't even have to address those 2 additional criteria, because everybody would be happy. Everyone would get what they want. But because we can't address those in these 3 criteria, we have these 2 additional ones. So in the findings, I believe that we still need to show why we don't believe that there's a hardship, and why we don't believe that there's a unique property limitation, or there may be. But we have to show that in the document, is what I'm getting at. I'm not saying that we're denying this or approving this one way or the other, but I'm saying that those findings just need to be clear.
Well,
and still have to go with state law.
I guess it seems to me that the concept of undue hardship or practical difficulties is always evaluated in the context of how substantial is the requested change to the structure.
Mr. Chair?
Yep, well, I'm probably just muddying up the record, so I better shut up.
Well, I was just going to refer back to the 3 criteria defined in the Supreme Court ruling. If you take the second of those, the applicant must prove an unnecessary hardship exists when compliance would unreasonably prevent the owner from using the property for a permitted purpose. I think that's what we're speaking to here, is they're saying this relief is necessary for them to make reasonable use of the property. And so I think they are making an argument that they're meeting that criteria. Now, whether the board agrees with that is maybe that's up to you.
Well, I would just make your sentence a little longer, that it's reasonable when there's going to be a disabled person living there. It's not reasonable when there's not. Heather?
And I was just going to add to the conversation, it's difficult because the federal law and the state law do not mesh. They don't line up together, and that's what's making this difficult. The statute does indicate, so Wisconsin Statute 59.6947C, which addresses variances, indicates that the property owner bears the burden of proving unnecessary hardship for an area variance by demonstrating that strict compliance with the zoning ordinance would unreasonably prevent the property owner from using the property owner's own property for a permitted purpose. Obviously, residential is a permitted purpose, or would render conformity with the zoning or ordinance unnecessarily burdensome. In this case, the applicants have indicated that building a ramp outside would be, about 100 feet. The ordinance does allow for access for reasonable accommodation, for ramps, lifts, walkways, but doing so may render conformity with that section of the ordinance unnecessarily burdensome. So as Chair Malik indicated previously, it's kind of like a request, they're requesting a variance from the reasonable accommodation section of the ordinance, really, because the walkway, lift, or stairway would render conformity unnecessarily burdensome to them. So that's why they're asking for the lift in the garage instead. So I think you could justify the unnecessary hardship prong of the standards by requiring them to build the ramp outside that would be unnecessarily burdensome to them, and that's why the lift is the alternative method. That is the unnecessary hardship. It's just a possibility.
I agree. I think that's what we're all saying.
Let's just make it happen. Yes.
Yeah.
Do it.
That's why I was suggesting in that we need to have some time, on that to create our findings and conclusions, and then we'll bring those back to you to be able to refer and confirm, so.
So we'll pass a motion to find that the variance criteria are met for the habitation of a disabled person. And then we'll come back subsequently to adopt a set of findings and conclusions that is consistent with that and has all the detailed words that we can agree upon.
Correct, and I think if we do the findings and conclusions correctly, that will address some of the board's concerns about opening the floodgates for a lot of these in the future.
And I don't mean to have the record reflect that in any way this board is hostile to the needs of disabled persons. It's just may be that some disabled persons have never been aware that they have this avenue. Do you feel the need to query us at all, Heather, to make the record stronger, recognizing that this decision is very susceptible to appeal?
If I could just go through the standards for the variances and the two standards for reasonable accommodations, just so that we can clarify the findings of fact, conclusions, law, and judgment for your approval at the next meeting. I'd just like to make it clear that you are answering yes or no to these questions.
I think that's fine. Do you want a motion preceding it or following it? Following it, probably.
Following it would be fine.
I'm not asking you to make a decision for us. I'm asking you to help us to make the most defensible record that we can.
I understand. So the standards for the variance criteria, first one, does this property contain unique physical property limitations that would prevent compliance with the ordinance? Is the answer to that question, in your opinion, yes or no?
No. What's your answer?
I say no.
Okay. Does denial, or is conformity with the regulations unnecessarily burdensome?
Yes.
Yes.
And does the granting of the variance result in harm to the public interest?
No.
Have the applicants proven that the desired accommodation will affirmatively enhance the disabled individual's quality of life?
Yes.
And would waiver of the ordinance requirements be so at odds with the purpose behind the Riverway District that it would be a fundamental and unreasonable change?
No.
Okay. I think that's all we need. And so basically, what I'm understanding is that because of the reasonable accommodation, you are going to grant the variance requests for modified option B. Is that accurate? Once you make your motion, you should make a motion, sorry.
I'll initiate the motion, unusual, but I'll do it. Yeah. That we grant the variance for the modifications to the building in its latest form, based on the disabled individual residing there.
Mr. Chair, would you like to amend your motion to include the affidavit being filed and the additional hardscape to be captured or mitigated?
I thought you'd put it in the conditions and so on, but that's fine with me if that makes it clear. May I adopt Jason's words? Did you all hear them? Yeah. Okay. That would be my motion.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion or debate along those lines? Additional words? And it's implied that we'll put this over for the next possible meeting and fill in the reasons in great detail at that time. All in favor should vote aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The motion's unanimously approved. Now we need to deal with the other two variances.
Just one. The variance in the conditional use.
The stairs was an after-the-fact conditional use.
Okay. So the deck variance, yep. I move that we grant the variance for the reconstruction of the deck as proposed.
I'll second it.
We'll modify option B.
Yep. We've got a plan for that already, a plan view of it. Yep. All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
All opposed, unanimously approved. And the conditional use for the stair, pardon?
Paint the,
Yeah, subject to repainting, yes, in an earth tone or summer vegetation color. We have a palette of pre-approved colors, but others are possible, right? Are you the mover?
I'll move to accept as amended.
Second?
I'll second that.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, and then, do you want to tie a vegetation mitigation plan with those stairways as well? So that, because we've had previous violations about them removing the understory there, so that any future owners know that that has to remain in place as well?
And how?
I would amend that to improve, to reflect that, yes.
So there'll be colors and there'll be the vegetation mitigation plan, yep. And you like that, Mr. Teljohn, with your second?
Yes.
Further discussion? All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimously approved. Does that dispose of today's business? And tomorrow's, you say?
Yeah, we're down to just announcements and correspondence, and I just want to touch base with you guys on some procedural stuff. Does the board want to continue to get staff suggestions or a recommendation on variance and conditional use permit request?
I do.
In the future?
Recognizing that we're in no way bound to follow them. Ideally, I'd like the staff to present a for and an against, so that we had a menu so we could say, well, I agree with that one, and I agree with that one, but I don't agree with that one. Or, but in the past, it's always been said it's just too much work for the staff to provide one version that is an approval and the other version that is a disapproval.
I think we might be able to accommodate something like that, but this leads into my other question is, we knew that the applicants today were going to have a lot of testimony and that to bring forward. And the way that our system works here for these agendas, we have to take and put whatever's in the agenda packet and that out a week ahead of time. So it does put staff in a little bit more of a time crunch. But if we could take and do it similar to what we did today, have our staff report completed, published with the agenda, then allow the applicants or their agents at the hearing to be able to testify. You guys would be able to hear any objection, and then that allows staff to hear that too and amend their final findings and conclusions of law, And then they would present that to you at the end of the meeting or before you're ready to make a determination, just to be the most inclusive. And then I think Corporation Council here would agree that that also gets the county away from having any predetermined outcomes, you know, on the matter and the application, so that we're not making up our mind as staff before the board gets to hear all the evidence and before our staff can hear the evidence, because they are able to provide, you know, findings of fact and conclusions of law right up through the hearing as well. So would the board be willing to do that? And if so, I can create a process, you know, on that, what that hearing outline would look like for you.
I'm certainly willing to try. It'll put us all under more stress and pressure, and it will have the disadvantage that the public who looks at the thing in advance won't have any hint of which side the staff is going to come down on, which probably sometimes has an effect on whether the public participates, whether they send in a letter or whether they show up for the hearing, you know. But I think we can live with that.
It could, yep, but the public might bring relative perspectives to the application as well, so.
Yep, maybe they wouldn't look at it and say, oh, well, this is a done deal, I guess I don't need to come.
Right.
But that their testimony could
Okay.
actually have an influence.
Okay,
Yeah.
yep,
Let's try it.
we can do that, yep.
I think that's partially suggested after the most recent case that was before Judge Nordstrand. One of the suggestions he made in his findings was that it appeared that the outcome was prejudged by staff, and so it may be helpful not to include those findings of fact and conclusions of law in the packet, but have them readily prepared, you know, 95% prepared, so that after all the testimony comes out, then they can be provided to the board.
Okay.
Let's see where it goes.
Okay. And then at the end of the agenda, we have to decide when our Board of Adjustment meetings are going to be. The next Board of Adjustment meeting is going to be October 26th. So on that agenda, we will have just confirmation of the ward variance and conditional use permit findings and conclusions. But after that, well, we've actually got 2 duplex applications on that meeting as well. But that looks like it's it for right now. November, as always, and that with you guys meeting on the 4th Thursday, we have Thanksgiving in there. And I was wondering if we have applications, when do we want to have a Board of Adjustment meeting? And furthermore, December, of course, with Christmas throws another wrinkle in there. So do we just want to have one combined meeting and that in early December? I don't know what you guys have done in the past, but, and then one maybe after the first of the year.
I think we've done that before.
Yeah, I think if you look back, you'll find a consistent pattern over the last several years of adjusting November, December, and January to boot, to accommodate the vacation schedule of the county.
Okay. Like the first Thursday of the month, do any of you sit on other boards? That would be
It'll be December 7th.
December 7th, yep.
That's okay right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if we get applications in and that's probably what we'll shoot for then, so.
That will affect your publication schedule and force Julie to think harder about that aspect of things.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think the board does still need to make a decision regarding the conditional use permit for filling and grading within 40 feet of the slope preservation zone.
Or included in the variance.
Or if that's just included as part of your approval of the variance to reconstruct the principal structure.
Well, let there be no ambiguity. If it's in doubt, we'll do it. Make a motion to approve the conditional use permit having to do with the grading that's pertinent to the building expansion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed, nay. Unanimous. Okay.
That's all I've got, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Dunn County is planning a board training program. I don't think the date has been announced yet, but when it comes to pass, you might make that, it'd be an evening session. Send the word around for the board members and plan to pay travel expenses and the registration fee, if you would please, out of the department budget. Yeah, deluxe accommodations in your own pickup truck. I'm gonna be away on the meeting on October 26th. We don't have proxy voting, but assuming that there are at least 3 of you who will be here who have heard this testimony and participated in this case, it should be no problem. So everybody stay healthy. Anything else for the good of the order? No? No? Thanks for hanging in there. It's 12:39 and we're finished.